The morning sun cast long shadows across the dusty main street of Silver Creek, Wyoming, painting the weathered storefronts in shades of amber and rust. Sheriff Jackson Foster stood on the wooden boardwalk outside his office, watching the town slowly come to life. It was the summer of 1878, and change hung in the air like the smell of distant rain. Jackson's weathered hands rested on his gun belt, though he hadn't drawn his Colt in anger for nearly 2 years, not since Mary died. The promise he'd made to her on her deathbed weighed heavier than the iron on his hip. No more killing unless absolutely necessary. No more blood on his hands. "Papa!" a small voice called from behind him. Sophie, his 7-year-old daughter, emerged from the jailhouse with his forgotten coffee mug. Her blonde hair caught the morning light, so much like her mother's it made his chest tighten. "Thank you, sweetheart." Jackson took the mug, noting how she'd already dressed herself in the blue calico dress Mrs. Henderson had sewn for her. The child was growing up too fast, forced to be more mature than her years demanded. "Mrs. Henderson says the new doctor arrived on yesterday's stage," Sophie announced, her green eyes bright with curiosity. "She says it's a lady doctor from back east. Is that true? Papa, can ladies be doctors?" Jackson smiled, the expression softening the hard lines of his face. "I reckon they can be anything they set their minds to. Just like you." Before Sophie could respond, the peaceful morning shattered. A gunshot cracked through the air, followed by the sound of breaking glass. Jackson's body tensed, old instincts from his army days flooding back. "Sophie, inside, now!" His voice carried the authority that brooked no argument. The child scurried back into the jailhouse as Jackson stepped into the street. Stumbling out of Murphy's saloon came Tom Brennan, the town drunk, waving an old Navy revolver wildly, even from 20 feet away. Jackson could smell the whiskey rolling off him in waves. "Where's my horse?" Brennan slurred, firing another shot into the air. "Someone stole my damn horse!" Jackson moved slowly, hands visible, speaking in calm, measured tones. "Tom, put the gun down. Let's talk about this." "Don't want to talk." Brennan swung the gun toward the gathering crowd. Women grabbed their children. Men ducked behind water troughs and barrels. "Want my horse back." Jackson's hand hovered near his holster. One quick draw, one shot, and the threat would be over. It would be justified. Everyone would understand. But Mary's voice echoed in his mind. "Promise me, Jackson, you're more than a weapon. Show Sophie there's another way." "Tom?" Jackson tried again, taking a careful step forward. "Your horse is probably at the livery, sleeping off last night same as you should be. Put the gun down, and we'll go look together." Brennan's bloodshot eyes tried to focus on the sheriff. The gun wavered between Jackson and the crowd. Then, with the unpredictability of a drunk, he swung it toward the millinery shop where Mrs. Patterson and her daughter huddled in the doorway. Time slowed. Jackson's hand moved without conscious thought. Muscle memory from countless hours of practice. The Colt cleared leather in one smooth motion. But instead of firing, Jackson lunged forward, using his momentum to tackle Brennan to the ground. The drunk's gun discharged harmlessly into the dirt as they fell. It was messy, undignified, and nothing like the clean, quick draws that had made Jackson's reputation during the war. But no one died. As Jackson wrestled the gun away from Brennan, he caught sight of Sophie watching from the jailhouse window, her small face proud. "Need some help, Sheriff?" Jackson looked up to see a woman he didn't recognize. She wore a practical gray traveling dress, her dark hair pinned up severely. But it was her eyes that caught his attention, steady, intelligent, unafraid. She carried a medical bag in one hand. "I'm Dr. Catherine Mitchell," she said, already kneeling beside them to check Brennan's pulse. "The gentleman seems to have rendered himself unconscious in the fall, probably for the best, given his inebriation." Jackson secured Brennan's hands with a leather strap and stood, dusting off his vest. Sheriff Jackson Foster. Welcome to Silver Creek, Dr. Mitchell. She rose gracefully, extending her hand like a man would. Jackson shook it, noting the calluses that spoke of hard work, the faint scars on her fingers. These were hands that had seen their share of blood and healing. I appreciate the welcome. Sheriff, though I've been in town since yesterday evening. Her voice carried a subtle Boston accent, refined but not pretentious. I must say, your method of subduing the gentleman was unexpected. Most lawmen I've encountered would have simply shot him. Most lawmen haven't made promises to little girls, Jackson replied before he could stop himself. Dr. Mitchell's expression softened slightly. No, I suppose they haven't. With the help of his deputy, Samuel Chen, one of the few Chinese men in town who'd earned respect through sheer determination and integrity, Jackson hauled Brennan to the jail. Dr. Mitchell accompanied them, insisting on examining the drunk for injuries. You know, she said as she checked Brennan's pupils, head injuries can be serious, even from a simple fall. In medical school, we studied cases where men seemed fine after a blow to the head, only to die hours later from bleeding in the brain. Medical school, Jackson repeated. That must have been challenging for a woman. Her jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. Yes, Sheriff, 16-hour days. Professors who believed women were too delicate for anatomy classes. Patients who refused to be treated by a female physician. Quite challenging indeed. I didn't mean... Yes, you did. She snapped her medical bag shut. But I appreciate that you're trying. That's more than most. She stood, smoothing her skirts. Your prisoner will be fine. The headache he'll have when he wakes will be punishment enough. As she turned to leave, Sophie appeared in the doorway, clutching a rag doll. The child studied the lady doctor with that direct, disconcerting gaze children sometimes possessed. Are you really a doctor? Sophie asked. Dr. Mitchell knelt to the child's level. I am, just like your father is really a sheriff. My mama died 2 winters ago. Sophie announced with the brutal honesty of childhood. The doctor couldn't save her. He said it was consumption. Something flickered across Dr. Mitchell's face, understanding, perhaps, or shared pain. I'm sorry about your mother. Sometimes, despite our best efforts, we can't save everyone, but we keep trying. Sophie nodded solemnly. Papa says that's what makes us human, the trying. Your papa sounds like a wise man. Jackson felt heat creep up his neck. Sophie, why don't you go help Mrs. Chen at the general store? She mentioned needing someone to sort the new buttons. Can I visit the doctor later? Sophie asked, already backing toward the door. I want to ask her about her medical tools. If Dr. Mitchell doesn't mind, I'd be delighted, the doctor said. In fact, I could use help organizing my new office, if your father approves, of course. After Sophie scampered off, an awkward silence settled between them. Jackson found himself studying the doctor more closely. Mid-30s, he guessed, with lines around her eyes that spoke of both laughter and sorrow. There was something in her bearing, a watchfulness that he recognized from his own mirror. You've seen combat, he said. It wasn't a question. Her eyebrows rose slightly. What makes you say that? The way you approached when Brennan was waving that gun. No panic. No hesitation. And your hands, he gestured to her fingers. Powder burns on your right thumb. Old ones. Observant. She pulled on her gloves, covering the telltale marks. I served as a surgical nurse during the war. Field hospitals, mostly. After that, she shrugged. Let's just say medical school seemed less daunting after trying to save boys with their intestines spilling out onto muddy ground. Jackson understood. God, how he understood. The things they'd seen, the choices they'd made in those bloody years, they left marks that went deeper than skin. Which side? He asked quietly. Does it matter now? She met his gaze steadily. We all bled red. Sheriff, we all screamed for our mothers at the end." Before he could respond, the door burst open. Samuel Chen rushed in, his usually calm demeanor shattered. "Sheriff, riders coming in fast from the east. Looks like railroad men. Fancy carriage, too." Jackson's shoulders tensed. The railroad had been sniffing around Silver Creek for months, but so far, the town had managed to keep them at arm's length. If they were coming in force now— "How many?" "8, maybe 10, armed." Samuel glanced at Dr. Mitchell, then back to Jackson. "The man in the carriage. I think I recognize him from the war. Colonel Walter Blackwell." The name hit Jackson like a physical blow. Walter Blackwell. His former commanding officer. The man who'd turned him into a weapon. Who'd sent him on missions so dark they weren't recorded in any official report. The man who knew exactly what Jackson had done in the shadows of the war. "Sheriff, Doctor," Mitchell's voice seemed to come from far away. "Are you all right?" Jackson realized his hand had moved to his gun. He forced it away, forced his breathing to steady. "I'm fine, Samuel. Make sure the street's clear. No need for anyone to get caught in the middle of whatever this is." "You know this Blackwell, Doctor?" Mitchell asked. "We served together." The words tasted like ash. "He was my commanding officer." "I see." She studied him with those perceptive eyes. "Would you like me to stay as the town's doctor? I mean, in case medical services are required." Jackson almost smiled at the transparent excuse. "That might be wise, Doctor. Thank you." The thunder of hooves grew louder. Through the window, Jackson could see the dust cloud approaching. In minutes, his past would ride into Silver Creek, threatening everything he'd built here, the peaceful life, the respect he'd earned, the safety he'd created for Sophie. He checked his Colt, more from habit than necessity, then stepped out onto the boardwalk. Dr. Mitchell followed, standing slightly behind and to his left, a position that kept her out of his line of fire while still allowing her to observe. Combat trained, indeed. The riders swept into town like a conquering army. 8 men, all armed, wearing matching dusters that couldn't quite hide the rifle butts protruding from saddle scabbards. They formed a loose semicircle in front of the jail as the carriage rolled to a stop. Walter Blackwell stepped out, and Jackson felt the years fall away. The colonel hadn't aged so much as hardened, like leather left too long in the sun. His black suit was immaculate despite the dust. His silver-headed cane more affectation than necessity. But it was his eyes that made Jackson's blood run cold, still the same calculating gray. Still seeing people as tools to be used. "Captain Foster," Blackwell said, his voice carrying the authority of a man used to being obeyed. Or should I say, Sheriff Foster now, how delightfully quaint. "Colonel." Jackson kept his voice neutral. "What brings you to Silver Creek?" "Progress, my boy. Progress and prosperity." Blackwell's smile was all teeth and no warmth. "The Central Pacific Railroad has hired me to oversee the expansion through this region. Naturally, I thought of my most capable subordinate when I heard you'd settled here." Behind Blackwell, the carriage door opened again. A younger man emerged, and Jackson saw his own past reflected in a crueler mirror. Marcus Blackwell had his father's sharp features, but none of his restraint. Where the colonel's violence was calculated, hidden beneath civilized veneer, Marcus wore his like a badge of honor. "This is your sheriff," Marcus sneered, taking in Jackson's simple clothes and tarnished star. "The famous ghost of Shiloh. He doesn't look like much." "Marcus." The colonel's voice carried a warning. "Show some respect. This man saved my life more times than I can count. By skulking in the shadows and slitting throats." Marcus shot back. "Any coward can kill in the dark." Jackson felt Dr. Mitchell tense beside him. He kept his own expression blank, though memories threatened to surface, memories of raids conducted under cover of darkness, of sentries who died without a sound, of information extracted through methods that would haunt him forever. Your son seems to have strong opinions about things he doesn't understand, Jackson said mildly. Marcus's hand twitched toward his gun. Maybe we should test whether the famous Captain Foster still has his edge. Enough. Blackwell's cane cracked against the wooden boardwalk. We're not here for a pissing contest. Sheriff, I'd like to discuss a business proposition. Perhaps somewhere more private. Jackson glanced around. Half the town had gathered to watch the confrontation. Curious faces peered from windows and doorways. This was exactly the kind of attention he'd spent 2 years avoiding. My office, he said finally. Your men can water their horses at the trough. They'll come with us, Marcus insisted. No, Jackson said flatly. They won't. This is my town. Mr. Blackwell, we do things peacefully here. Father and son exchanged looks. The colonel nodded slightly. Wait here, he told his men. Marcus, you too. Father. That's an order. Jackson led the way into the jail, acutely aware of Dr. Mitchell following uninvited. Blackwell raised an eyebrow, but said nothing about her presence. Inside, Jackson moved behind his desk, a psychological barrier as much as a physical one. Blackwell settled into the chair across from him like he owned it. Doctor. Mitchell stood by the window, ostensibly looking out but clearly listening. I'll be direct. Blackwell began. The railroad is coming through this valley. It's not a question of if, but when and how. I'm here to ensure the process goes smoothly. Smoothly meaning what exactly? Meaning, without the unfortunate incidents that have plagued other expansion efforts, Indian raids, sabotage, local resistance. Blackwell's eyes glittered. I need someone who understands both sides of the law. Someone who can manage situations before they become problems. I'm not your enforcer anymore, Colonel. No, Blackwell leaned back, studying him. Yet here you are, wearing a badge, still using violence to maintain order, just with official sanction now. How is that different from what we did during the war? Everything about it is different. Is it? Blackwell's smile was knowing. Tell me, Sheriff, does this good doctor know what kind of man she's standing beside? Does your daughter know what her father did in service to his country? Jackson's jaw tightened. What I did during the war has no bearing on... Doesn't it? Blackwell interrupted. The people of this town trust you to protect them. What would they think if they knew about Nashville, about the Richmond operation, about the things you did to extract information from Mainduturanan? That's enough! Jackson's voice cut through the air like a blade. Yes, Blackwell agreed. It is enough. More than enough to destroy the life you've built here. Unless, of course, we can come to an understanding. The threat hung between them, unsubtle and ugly. Jackson felt the familiar rage building, the cold calculation that had made him so effective during the war. How easy it would be to draw his gun, to put a bullet between those calculating gray eyes. He'd done it before to men who threatened him, but Sophie's face flashed in his mind, and Mary's dying words echoed in his ears. What kind of understanding? He asked, hating himself for the question. Simple. You continue as sheriff, keeping the peace as the railroad comes through. You handle any local objections with your usual efficiency. In return, your past remains buried. Your daughter grows up with a father instead of a shameful memory, and you're compensated generously for your cooperation. Dr. Mitchell turned from the window. Sheriff Foster, I believe you're needed outside. There seems to be some commotion. Jackson looked at her gratefully. Through the window, he could see Marcus Blackwell shoving Samuel Chen, his hand on his gun. Without a word, Jackson stood and walked out, leaving the colonel behind. Problem? He asked mildly, stepping between Marcus and his deputy. This Chinaman was giving me lip. Marcus snarled, In my father's world. That gets you horsewhipped. This isn't your father's world. Jackson replied, And Deputy Chen has full authority in this town. You'll show him respect, or you'll enjoy our accommodations from the inside." Marcus's face flushed red. "You dare threaten me? Do you know who I am?" "A man who bleeds like any other," Jackson said quietly. "Now step back." For a moment, violence crackled in the air. Marcus's men shifted restlessly, hands near weapons. The townspeople watched, waiting to see if their sheriff would back down. Then Dr. Mitchell emerged from the jail, Blackwell Sr. behind her. "Perhaps we should continue this another time," she suggested pleasantly. "I believe emotions are running rather high." The colonel studied the scene, his expression unreadable. "Indeed. Marcus, we're leaving." "Father." "Now." As the railroad men mounted up, Blackwell paused beside Jackson. "Think about my offer. Captain, I'll be staying at the Grand Hotel. You have until tomorrow evening to decide." They rode out in a cloud of dust and tension, leaving Jackson standing in the street with the weight of his past pressing down on his shoulders. "Doctor." Mitchell remained beside him, a surprisingly comforting presence. "Well," she said after a moment, "that was illuminating." Jackson looked at her sharply. "Doctor." "I'm not asking," she interrupted. "We all have things we'd rather forget. Sheriff, but if you need someone to talk to, someone who understands that the war made monsters of us all, I'll be in my office." She walked away before he could respond, leaving Jackson alone with his thoughts and the curious stares of his town. In the distance, Sophie emerged from the general store, her arms full of button cards, her smile bright and trusting. The promise he'd made to Mary had never felt heavier. How could he protect his daughter from violence when violence was carved into his very bones? How could he stand against the railroad when Blackwell held his past like a loaded gun? As the sun climbed higher over Silver Creek, Jackson Foster stood at a crossroads, knowing that whatever path he chose would echo through his daughter's future like gunshots in the night. The Grand Hotel stood like a monument to prosperity on Silver Creek's main street, its 3 stories of imported brick and glass windows reflecting the ambitious dreams of a growing town. Jackson Foster stood across the street in the pre-dawn darkness, watching the yellow glow of lamplight in the 3rd-floor corner suite. Blackwell was awake, probably planning his next move like the chess player he'd always been. 2 days had passed since the railroad men rode into town. 2 days of Jackson wrestling with the past while trying to maintain the present. The deadline Blackwell had set would expire at sunset, and Jackson still hadn't given his answer. "Can't sleep either." Jackson didn't startle. He'd heard Dr. Mitchell's approach. The woman moved quietly for someone who'd never claimed to be anything more than a doctor. "Sophie had nightmares," he said, which was partially true. His daughter had indeed woken twice, calling for him, but it was his own demons that had driven him into the street. "Children sense more than we give them credit for." "Doctor," Mitchell stood beside him, her medical bag in hand. "Early house call. The Henderson baby has croup 3rd night in a row." She paused. "You're going to refuse him, aren't you, Blackwell?" It wasn't really a question. Jackson appreciated that she didn't pretend otherwise. "A man can't run from his past forever," he said. "No," she agreed, "but he can choose not to repeat it." Before Jackson could respond, the sound of breaking glass shattered the morning quiet. A woman's scream followed, high and terrified. Jackson was running before the echo faded, Dr. Mitchell close behind. The commotion came from the Lucky Dollar Saloon. Jackson burst through the batwing doors to find Marcus Blackwell holding a saloon girl by the arm, her face already showing the red mark of a slap. A broken whiskey bottle lay at their feet. "Just teaching this dove some manners." Marcus slurred, obviously drunk despite the early hour. "Seems she thinks she's too good to be friendly." The girl, Annie Sawyer, Jackson recognized, barely 18, tried to pull away. "Please, I just serve drinks. I told you." Marcus backhanded her again. sending her sprawling. "You'll do what you're paid for." Jackson moved forward. "But Doctor, Mitchell was faster." She knelt beside Annie, deliberately placing herself between the girl and Marcus. "Step away from them," Jackson said, his voice deadly quiet. Marcus laughed. "Or what? Sheriff, you'll arrest me for disciplining a saloon girl. My father owns half the territory's judges." "I said step away." Something in Jackson's tone must have penetrated Marcus's alcohol haze. The younger man's hand dropped to his gun. "Maybe it's time someone showed you." Jackson's draw was liquid motion. 5 decades of muscle memory compressed into a heartbeat. His Colt was aimed at Marcus's head before the man's fingers touched leather. "Touch that iron and I'll drop you where you stand," Jackson said. "Badge or no badge." The saloon held its breath. Marcus's men, who'd been drinking at the bar, started to move. Jackson shifted slightly, keeping them in his peripheral vision. "You wouldn't dare," Marcus breathed. "Boy," Jackson said softly. "I've killed better men than you for less reason. The only thing keeping you upright is a promise I made to a dead woman. But push me much further, and I'll decide her memory can survive one more ghost." "Doctor." Mitchell helped Annie to her feet. "Can you walk? Dear good, let's get you somewhere safe." She guided the girl toward the door, pausing beside Jackson. "Sheriff, I'll need to examine Miss Sawyer properly. Perhaps you could send Deputy Chen to take her statement." It was a graceful exit, removing the victim and potential witness. Jackson nodded slightly, never taking his eyes off Marcus. "Your move." He told Blackwell's son, "You can walk out of here and sleep it off, or you can draw. But decide quick. My arm's getting tired." Marcus's face contorted with rage and humiliation. For a moment, Jackson thought he might actually try it. Then Walter Blackwell's voice cut through the tension like a cavalry saber. "Stand down, Marcus." The colonel stood in the doorway, immaculate despite the early hour. His gray eyes took in the scene with disapproval. "Father, this man is doing his job." Blackwell moved into the saloon with measured steps. "Which you're interfering with. Again." "He drew on me. After you assaulted a woman. From what I can see." Blackwell's gaze was cold. "We discussed this. You're to be on your best behavior. She's just a whore." The crack of Blackwell's cane across his son's face was shockingly loud. Marcus stumbled, blood flowing from his nose. "You're an embarrassment," the colonel said conversationally. "Sheriff Foster showed remarkable restraint. In his position, I would have shot you already." He turned to Jackson. "My apologies. The boy takes after his late mother all passion. No discipline." Jackson slowly holstered his weapon. "Get him out of here, now!" "Of course." Blackwell gestured to his men. "Take Mr. Marcus back to the hotel. He's to remain in his room until I say otherwise." As they hauled the protesting Marcus away, Blackwell lingered. "You haven't given me your answer." "You have it now," Jackson replied. "The answer is no." Blackwell smiled thinly. "I expected as much. You always were frustratingly principled, even when it worked against your interests. If you're threatening—" "Threatening?" Blackwell looked genuinely surprised. "My dear boy, I don't make threats. I simply observe cause and effect. You've refused my generous offer. Very well. The railroad will come through regardless. And if the good people of Silver Creek suffer for your stubbornness, that's on your conscience." He tipped his hat and walked out, leaving Jackson alone with the morning drunks and his own bitter thoughts. An hour later, Jackson found Dr. Mitchell in her office, wrapping Annie Sawyer's ribs. The girl winced, but didn't cry out. "Nothing broken," the doctor announced. "Though you'll be sore for a few days. I want you to stay with Mrs. Patterson until you feel safe returning to work." Annie nodded, pulling her shawl tight. "Thank you, Sheriff, both of you. Marcus Blackwell. He's been getting worse since they arrived." Worse how? Jackson asked. He comes in every night, drinking heavy. Says things about the town? About what's coming. Annie shivered. Last night he was talking about some place called Miller's Creek. Said soon his father would own it all, and anyone who stood in their way would be sorry. Jackson and Dr. Mitchell exchanged glances. Miller's Creek was a stretch of land east of town, noteworthy only for its cemetery and a few scattered homesteads. Did he say anything else, Doctor? Mitchell asked gently. Just that the surveyor's reports were better than expected. He was real happy about that, buying rounds for everyone. Annie stood carefully. I should go. Mrs. Patterson will worry. After she left, Dr. Mitchell turned to Jackson. Miller's Creek. Isn't that where they buried the unknown soldiers from the Canyon Creek skirmish? Among others. Jackson moved to the window, watching the town wake up. Mostly drifters, Indians who converted, folks who didn't have family to claim them. Why would Blackwell care about worthless land and old graves? Maybe it's not as worthless as everyone thinks. Dr. Mitchell began cleaning her instruments. In Boston, I saw how the railroad companies operated. They'd buy up worthless land for pennies, then discover it was the only viable route for their tracks. Value would increase 100-fold overnight. Blackwell always did like his sure bets. Jackson turned from the window. Doctor, what I said in the saloon, about killing. We all survived the war differently. She interrupted. I saved lives when I could and eased passing when I couldn't. You did what you were ordered to do. It was more than that. The words came hard. I was good at it. Too good. Blackwell saw that, used it. Night raids, infiltration, interrogation. Stop. Her voice was firm, but not unkind. I've seen what guilt does to a person. Sheriff, it's a poison that serves no purpose except to weaken us for the fights ahead. Speaking from experience. She was quiet for a moment. There was a field hospital outside Chancellorsville. We were overwhelmed, hundreds of wounded. Not enough supplies. Not enough hands. I had to choose who to treat and who to let go. Boys crying for their mothers while I moved past them to someone who might survive. Her hands stilled on the instruments. 16 years later, I still hear them sometimes. They stood in shared silence. Two people marked by a war that had ended but never really left. Finally, Jackson spoke. I need to check out Miller's Creek, see what Blackwell's really after. I'll come with you. He started to protest, then stopped. Something told him, Doctor, Catherine Mitchell could handle herself in rough country. Can you ride? Her smile was answer enough. They left town quietly. Jackson on his bay gelding and Doctor. Mitchell on a sturdy mare borrowed from the livery. The morning sun climbed as they rode east, the landscape shifting from the relative green of Silver Creek to the harsher terrain beyond. Miller's Creek itself was a narrow stream that ran dry half the year. The cemetery sat on a small rise overlooking the water, weathered wooden crosses and stone markers telling stories of lives cut short. Jackson dismounted, studying the ground with a tracker's eye. Someone's been here recently, he said, pointing to wagon tracks. Heavy loads, multiple trips. Doctor, Mitchell knelt beside a disturbed patch of earth. This grave's been opened and refilled. Look at how the soil's different. Jackson's blood chilled. Grave robbing was a hanging offense, but more than that, it was a desecration that offended every moral code of the frontier. Why would? He stopped, understanding flooding through him. They're not robbing graves. They're surveying. For what? Jackson grabbed a stick and began sketching in the dirt. The railroad needs water for the steam engines. Miller's Creek is seasonal, but if there's an underground source... He looked up at the cemetery. The old-timers always said this was sacred ground to the Arapaho. They knew things about water we didn't. So Blackwell thinks there's an aquifer here. Or something else. Jackson stood, dusting off his hands. We need to... The crack of a rifle shot interrupted him. Rock exploded from a headstone inches from Dr. Mitchell's head. Jackson tackled her behind a larger monument as another shot rang out. "Stay down," he hissed, drawing his Colt. More shots followed, coming from multiple directions. They were pinned down, caught in a crossfire with no clear route to their horses. "Can you see them, Doctor?" Mitchell asked, remarkably calm for someone under fire. Jackson risked a quick look. 3 shooters, maybe 4, spread out in those rocks to the north. Blackwell's men. Has to be. Another shot chipped stone above their heads. "They're not trying to hit us, just keep us pinned." Why? Understanding dawned in her eyes. "They're buying time. For what?" Jackson's answer was drowned out by a new sound, horses approaching fast from the west. Many horses. "Sheriff Foster," Blackwell's voice carried across the cemetery. "I do hope you're not hurt. My men can be overzealous." "Call them off," Jackson shouted back. "Of course. As soon as we've had a chat about your trespassing on railroad property. This is public land." "Actually," Blackwell sounded amused. "As of this morning, it belongs to the Central Pacific. Amazing how quickly paperwork can be processed with the right incentives." Jackson cursed under his breath. Blackwell had played them perfectly, using Marcus's drunken revelations to bait the trap. "What do you want?" he called. "The same thing I wanted 2 days ago. Your cooperation, although the price has gone up considerably." "Doctor," Mitchell touched Jackson's arm. "I have an idea," she whispered, "but you're not going to like it." Before he could stop her, she stood up, hands raised. "Colonel Blackwell, I'm Dr. Mitchell. I believe there's been a misunderstanding." Doctor, get down." Jackson grabbed for her, but she stepped out of reach. "I'm unarmed," she continued, walking slowly toward Blackwell's position. "Perhaps we can discuss this like civilized people." Jackson watched in horror as she moved into the open. The hidden shooters could cut her down in seconds, but they held their fire, probably as confused as he was. Blackwell rode into view, flanked by 6 men. He touched his hat politely. "Dr. Mitchell, this is an unexpected pleasure." "Colonel." She stood straight, hands still visible but relaxed. "I couldn't help but overhear your business proposal to Sheriff Foster. I have one of my own." "Indeed. You need the sheriff's cooperation to smooth your railroad's passage through Silver Creek. He needs to protect his town and his daughter. I believe I can help both parties reach an agreement." Jackson stood slowly, gun still in hand. "Doctor, what are you doing?" She didn't look at him. "What I do best, Sheriff, healing wounds before they fester." Blackwell studied her with interest. "You have my attention. Doctor, speak your piece. The sheriff won't be your enforcer. We both know that. But what if he didn't have to be? What if there was another way to ensure the railroad's safe passage?" "Go on." "You're concerned about resistance from locals and indigenous peoples. What if, instead of suppression, we tried cooperation medical services for railroad workers and local communities alike? Fair wages for local labor, respect for sacred sites and cemeteries." Marcus Blackwell rode up beside his father, his face still showing bruises from the morning's encounter. "This is ridiculous. We don't negotiate with—" "Silence," the colonel snapped. He remained focused on Dr. Mitchell, and in return, the railroad gets its route. The town gets prosperity without bloodshed. Sheriff Foster maintains his integrity. She paused. "And certain information about past military operations remains buried deeper than any grave here." The threat was elegantly delivered. Jackson realized Dr. Mitchell had been listening very carefully during Blackwell's earlier conversations. The colonel's eyes narrowed. "You presume a great deal, Doctor." "I observe cause and effect, as you said earlier." Her voice was steady. "The war created many secrets. Colonel, some about the men who fought, others about the men who gave the orders. Records that were supposedly destroyed but found their way into medical corps files. Field hospital reports that paint. Interesting pictures of certain operations. The morning seemed to hold its breath. Jackson saw Blackwell's men shift nervously. Even Marcus looked uncertain. Finally, Blackwell smiled. It wasn't a pleasant expression. "You're not just a doctor, are you?" "I'm exactly what I claim to be." "Doctor," Mitchell replied. "A healer who's seen too much unnecessary death. The question is whether we add more bodies to Miller's Creek or find a better way." Blackwell considered for a long moment. Then he holstered his pistol with deliberate slowness. "You make an interesting case. Doctor, tell me more about this cooperation you envision." For the next hour, they negotiated there among the graves, working out details of an agreement that might avoid bloodshed. Jackson contributed when asked, but mostly watched Doctor. Mitchell work, she was magnificent, matching Blackwell point for point, never backing down but never pushing too hard. When they finally reached a tentative agreement, the sun was high overhead. Blackwell's men would survey Miller's Creek, but wouldn't disturb existing graves. The railroad would hire locally when possible and provide medical facilities. Most importantly, they would negotiate with rather than remove any residents in the path of development. "This is just a framework," Blackwell warned as they prepared to part. "The devil's in the details." "Then we'd better make sure the details are righteous." "Doctor," Mitchell replied. As the railroad men rode away, Jackson turned to the doctor. "That was either brilliant or insane." "Sometimes they're the same thing." She was trembling now, adrenaline finally catching up. "Did you mean what you said about killing better men for less reason?" "Yes," he said simply. "But you didn't kill him. I mean, even when he hurt that girl." "I wanted to." The admission came hard. "God help me. I wanted to paint that saloon with his blood." "But you didn't," she repeated. "That's what matters. That's what makes you different from the man Blackwell wants you to be." They mounted their horses for the ride back to town. As they crested the rise above Miller's Creek, "Doctor," Mitchell spoke again. "There's something else going on here. Something about this land Blackwell isn't telling us." Jackson nodded. "I know, but at least now we have time to find out what." They rode in comfortable silence until Silver Creek came into view. The town looked peaceful in the afternoon light, unaware of how close it had come to becoming a battlefield. "Thank you," Jackson said as they neared the livery, "for what you did back there. It was brave. It was necessary." She dismounted, handing the reins to the stable boy. "Sheriff, I should tell you something. When I said I had access to certain war records, that wasn't entirely a bluff." He studied her face. "How much do you know?" "Enough to understand why Blackwell both needs and fears you. Enough to know that Sophie is lucky to have a father who fights so hard against his nature. My nature is what I'm afraid of." "Your nature," she said softly, "is what saved Annie this morning. What refused Blackwell's offer despite the personal cost. What tries every day to be the man your daughter believes you to be." She walked away before he could respond, leaving Jackson to wonder how a doctor from Boston could see him more clearly than he saw himself. That evening, as he tucked Sophie into bed, his daughter asked, "Papa, is the railroad coming to Silver Creek?" "Looks like it, sweetheart." "Will things change?" Jackson smoothed her hair, so like her mother's. "Everything changes, Sophie. That's how life works. But some things, the important things, those we fight to keep the same." "Like us." "Like us," he agreed, kissing her forehead. As she drifted off to sleep, Jackson stood by her window, looking out at the town he'd sworn to protect. Change was coming to Silver Creek, ready or not, but maybe, with the help of an extraordinary doctor and the memory of promises made, they could face it without losing their souls. Outside, a lone rider galloped east toward Miller's Creek. In the darkness, it was impossible to tell who it was, but Jackson had a feeling their troubles were just beginning. Whatever secret that cemetery held, Someone was desperate to claim it. And desperation, he knew from hard experience, made men capable of terrible things. The town meeting hall overflowed with angry voices as Jackson Foster stood before his community, trying to maintain order. 3 weeks had passed since the tentative agreement at Miller's Creek, and the railroad's true intentions were becoming clearer with each passing day. "They're saying we have to move the entire cemetery," shouted Thomas Garrett, the blacksmith. "My grandfather's buried there. My grandmother, too." "And what about the sacred burial grounds?" added Martha Chen, Samuel's wife. "The Arapaho trusted us to protect those graves when they moved to the reservation." Jackson raised his hands for quiet. "I understand your concerns." "Do you?" interrupted Henry Mills, the banker. "Because from where I'm standing, it looks like you made a deal with the devil without consulting any of us." Dr. Mitchell rose from her seat near the back. "The sheriff negotiated in good faith to prevent violence. Would you prefer federal troops enforcing the railroad's will at gunpoint?" "Maybe that's what we need," Mills shot back. "At least then we'd know where we stand." The meeting descended into chaos. Neighbors arguing with neighbors. Fear and anger turning friend against friend. Jackson watched it all with a heavy heart. This was exactly what Blackwell wanted: division that would make the town easier to control. A gunshot outside silenced the room. Jackson was moving before the echo faded, his hand on his Colt as he pushed through the doors. In the street, Marcus Blackwell stood over a crumpled figure, smoking pistol in hand. "He came at me," Marcus declared to the gathering crowd. "You all saw it. Self-defense." Jackson knelt beside the fallen man, James Holbrook, a farmer from Miller's Creek. Blood seeped through his shirt, but he was still breathing. "Doctor." Mitchell appeared beside them, her medical bag already open. "Get him to my office," she ordered. "Carefully, Sheriff. I need hot water and clean bandages." As men carried Holbrook away, Jackson faced Marcus. "What happened here?" "Your farmer friend didn't like being told his land was needed for progress." Marcus holstered his weapon with casual indifference. "He made threats. I defended myself." "Jim Holbrook never carried a gun in his life," someone called out. Marcus shrugged. "Check his wagon. You'll find a rifle." Jackson did check and found a rifle, one that looked suspiciously new and clean for a farmer's weapon. But planted or not, it gave Marcus legal cover. "You're coming with me," Jackson said, "until we sort this out." "I don't think so." Walter Blackwell emerged from the Grand Hotel, flanked by 4 men. "My son acted within his rights, unless you have evidence to the contrary." The crowd pressed closer, tension crackling like lightning before a storm. Jackson could feel the town balanced on a knife's edge. One wrong move and blood would flow. "Papa?" Sophie's small voice cut through the tension. She stood on the boardwalk with Mrs. Henderson, eyes wide with fear. The sight of his daughter drained the violence from Jackson's thoughts. He stepped back, hands visible. "Take your son back to the hotel, Colonel. But this isn't over." "No," Blackwell agreed. "It's just beginning." In Dr. Mitchell's office, Jackson watched her work on Holbrook. Her hands were steady, skilled, removing the bullet with practiced efficiency. "He'll live," she announced finally. "The bullet missed anything vital, whether by luck or design. I couldn't say." Holbrook's eyes fluttered open. "Sheriff," he gasped. "They know. About the gold." Jackson leaned closer. "What gold?" "Jim." "Miller's Creek. My boy found it fishing last month. Nuggets in the stream bed. We kept quiet, but somehow they found out." Holbrook gripped Jackson's arm. "That's what this is about. Not water for the railroad. Gold." The pieces fell into place with sickening clarity. The surveys, the urgency, the willingness to desecrate graves, it all made sense now. "Rest." "Doctor," Mitchell told Holbrook. administering laudanum for the pain. "You're safe here." Outside the office, Jackson found Samuel Chen waiting. "How bad is it?" "Bad enough," Jackson replied. "Gather the town council. Quietly, we need to talk." An hour later, 6 men and 2 women gathered in Jackson's office, the town council plus Dr. Mitchell and Father Miguel Santos from the mission. "Gold changes everything," Henry Mills said after Jackson explained. "If word gets out, we'll have thousands of prospectors here within weeks. The railroad will have legal claim to mineral rights along their road," added Judge Warren. "That's standard in their contracts." "Legal or not, they can't move graves without permission from next of kin," Martha Chen insisted. "They can if they have a federal order declaring it necessary for progress." "Doctor," Mitchell said quietly, "I've seen it happen in other towns." Thomas Garrett slammed his fist on the desk. "So we fight. We've all got guns." "And they have more," Jackson said. "Plus legal authority, plus time. Violence plays into their hands." "Then what do you suggest?" Sheriff Father Miguel asked. "Prayer. Information." Jackson replied, "Blackwell's playing a game, but he's not the only player. The railroad has investors, government oversight, newspapers watching. If we can prove they're using false pretenses to steal land, that's a dangerous path," Judge Warren warned. "These men have resources we can't match." "Maybe, Doctor," Mitchell said. "But they also have enemies. No one rises to Blackwell's level without making them." Samuel leaned forward. "I might know someone. During my time building the Western rail lines, I heard stories about Blackwell. Not all his ventures succeeded. There was something in California." The door burst open. One of Jackson's part-time deputies, young Tom Morrison, stumbled in. "Sheriff, there's trouble at the mission. Marcus Blackwell and his men, they're tearing the place apart." Jackson was running before the boy finished talking. The mission sat at the edge of town, a small adobe building that served both the remaining Mexican families and any Indians who came to trade. As they approached, they could hear crashes and screams. Inside was chaos. Marcus's men were overturning pews, ripping tapestries from walls, while Marcus himself stood at the altar, holding Father Miguel's elderly assistant, Sister Lucia, by the arm. "Where is it?" Marcus shouted. "The survey records, we know that old Mexican surveyor hid them here." "Please," Sister Lucia whimpered. "I don't know what you mean." Jackson stepped through the doorway. "Let her go, Marcus." Marcus spun, dragging the nun with him as a shield. "Sheriff Foster, come to pray." "Let her go." "Or what you'll shoot through a nun." Marcus laughed. "We both know you won't. Too much conscience. It's what makes you weak." Jackson heard movement behind him, townspeople gathering. Dr. Mitchell among them. The doctor's eyes were fixed on Sister Lucia, watching for signs of distress. "You're right," Jackson said, surprising everyone. "I won't shoot through an innocent, but I don't need to." His draw was smooth, unhurried. The Colt fired once, the bullet passing so close to Marcus's ear that he felt the heat. The young man jerked back, releasing Sister Lucia, who scrambled away. "The next one takes your ear," Jackson said conversationally. "The one after that, your nose. I can do this all day, boy. The question is, how pretty you want to look when I'm done." Marcus's hand twitched toward his gun. "Please," Jackson said, "give me the excuse." For a long moment, they stood frozen. Then Walter Blackwell's voice rang out. "Stand down, Marcus." The colonel entered the mission, taking in the destruction with apparent distaste. "Subtlety remains beyond you. I see." "Father." "Enough. We're leaving." He turned to Jackson. "My apologies for the disturbance. Sheriff, my son sometimes confuses enthusiasm with effectiveness." As the railroad men filed out, Sister Lucia tugged on Jackson's sleeve. "Sheriff," she whispered, "what they seek, it exists, hidden in Father Francisco's tomb, but it's not what they think." Later that night, by lamplight in the mission graveyard. Jackson and Father Miguel carefully opened the old priest's tomb. Inside, wrapped in oilcloth, were indeed survey documents, but from 1847, before the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo. Mexican land grants, Father Miguel breathed. These predate American claims. Dr. Mitchell studied the documents. This shows Miller's Creek has granted land to the Delgado family, with provisions for native burial rights in perpetuity. The Delgados still have descendants in Santa Fe, Jackson said. If these are valid, the railroad's claims could be challenged in court. Judge Warren finished. He'd insisted on witnessing the discovery. This changes everything. It also paints a target on our backs, Samuel warned. If Blackwell learns about these, then we'd better make sure he doesn't. Jackson replied, not until we're ready. They resealed the tomb, each taking an oath to keep the secret. But as they dispersed into the night, Jackson noticed a figure watching from the shadows. Before he could investigate, it vanished. The next morning brought more trouble. 5 families from Miller's Creek arrived in town, their wagons loaded with possessions. They burned us out, one farmer reported, said the land was needed immediately for surveying. When we refused to leave, they set fire to our barn. The house caught too. Dr. Mitchell worked tirelessly, treating burns and smoke inhalation. Jackson took statements, building a case, but he knew it was futile. The families had no proof of who set the fires. This is my fault, he told Catherine as they worked. I should have anticipated. Stop, she said firmly. Guilt is a luxury we can't afford. Focus on what we do next. What came next was a surprise. That afternoon, a stranger rode into town, a well-dressed man with the bearing of someone used to authority. He introduced himself as Jonathan Hartwell, investigator for the Railroad Commission. I'm here about irregularities in the Central Pacific's expansion plans, he told Jackson privately. Anonymous reports of claim jumping, intimidation, possible fraud. Would you know anything about that? Jackson studied the man. It could be a trap, but instinct told him otherwise. I might, but information like that could be dangerous to share. More dangerous to keep hidden. Hartwell replied, I have the authority to suspend railroad operations pending investigation, but I need evidence. That evening, Jackson called another meeting, this time including Hartwell. The town council listened as the investigator explained their options. File formal complaints. Document everything. If we can prove systematic fraud, the railroad's charter could be revoked. And in the meantime, Dr. Mitchell asked, more families burned out, more accidental shootings. I can post federal marshals. Who'll arrive after we're all dead or driven off? Thomas Garrett interrupted. Hartwell's expression was grim. I won't lie to you. This is dangerous. Blackwell has powerful friends, but he also has powerful enemies who'd love to see him fall. Jackson made a decision. We'll cooperate, but we do this smart. No one acts alone. No one takes unnecessary risks. Agreed, Hartwell said. I'll need to see those survey documents Sister Lucia mentioned. Silence fell. Finally, Jackson spoke. What survey documents? Hartwell smiled thinly. The ones hidden in Father Francisco's tomb. Yes, Sheriff, I know about them. I told you I have sources, too. Jackson's blood chilled. If Hartwell knew, who else did? As if reading his thoughts, Hartwell added, we're not the only ones watching this town. Sheriff, best we work together before others decide to act. The meeting broke up with agreements to gather evidence and testimonies. But as people filed out, Dr. Mitchell lingered. You don't trust him, she observed. I don't trust anyone anymore. Jackson admitted, except you, and I'm not even sure why that is. She smiled sadly. Because I'm the only one not trying to use you for something. Aren't you? I suppose I am, she said after a moment. I'm using you to save this town, to prove that violence isn't always the answer. to show that people can change, can be better than their worst moments. That's a lot of faith to place in a killer. Former killer. She corrected. Current sheriff. Future. Well, that remains to be written. Before Jackson could respond, gunshots rang out. Not one or two, but a fusillade that shattered windows and sent people diving for cover. Jackson pushed Dr. Mitchell down, shielding her as bullets whined overhead. When the shooting stopped, Marcus Blackwell's voice rang out. Just a reminder, Sheriff, this town exists at our pleasure. Push too hard, and we'll push back. Jackson rose slowly, fury burning in his chest. Across the street, he could see Sophie's terrified face in Mrs. Henderson's window. The promise to his wife warred with the trained killer's instinct to end the threat permanently. Sheriff, Doctor, Mitchell said softly, remember who you choose to be. He forced his hand away from his gun. Get everyone inside. Treat any wounded. I'll deal with this. But when he stepped into the street, the railroad men were already gone, leaving only broken glass and fear in their wake. The message was clear: they could strike anywhere, any time. That night, as Jackson made his rounds, he found the town transformed. Windows were boarded. Men stood watch with rifles. Women kept children indoors. Silver Creek was under siege. At the mission, Father Miguel was praying with a group of townspeople. Fear is the enemy's greatest weapon, the priest said, but faith and unity are our shield. Nice words, Jackson thought, but faith wouldn't stop bullets. He found Dr. Mitchell still in her office, treating a child who'd been cut by flying glass. After the family left, she slumped in exhaustion. We can't go on like this, she said. No, Jackson agreed. We can't. So what do we do? Jackson stared out the window at his frightened town. We fight back, but not how they expect. Hartwell wants evidence. We'll get it. Every burned building, every threat, every illegal act. We document it all. And if they escalate, then we'll be ready. He turned to her. I need you to do something. Write to your contacts in Boston, the ones who provided those war records. Tell them what's happening here. If something happens to us, someone needs to know the truth. She nodded. Jackson, at the meeting, when you covered me, thank you. It's my job. No, she said softly. It was more than that, and we both know it. The moment stretched between them, heavy with unspoken possibilities. Then another gunshot echoed through the night, and the moment shattered. Jackson ran toward the sound, knowing that each shot fired brought them closer to the violence he'd tried so hard to avoid. But some fights, he was learning, chose you whether you wanted them or not. The question was no longer whether blood would spill in Silver Creek. The question was whose, and whether anything good could grow from ground watered with it. The discovery came at dawn, when old Theodore Roosevelt, no relation to the New York family, as he'd tell anyone who'd listen, was out checking his trap lines along Miller's Creek. His shout echoed across the valley, bringing Jackson Foster running from his morning rounds. Sheriff, you need to see this. Jackson found Theodore standing knee-deep in the creek, holding something that caught the morning light. Gold. Not just flakes or dust, but a nugget the size of a child's fist. Found it wedged under that fallen oak, Theodore whispered, as if speaking too loudly might make it disappear. There's more. Sheriff, the whole creek bed's full of it. Jackson's mind raced. This was what Blackwell had been after, what had driven the urgency and violence. But if word got out now, before they were ready. Theodore, I need you to trust me. Put it back. Put it back. The old man's eyes widened. Sheriff, this could make us all rich. Or get us all killed. The railroad knows about this. That's why they want the land so badly. Jackson gripped Theodore's shoulder. Keep this quiet. Tell no one, not even your wife. Can you do that? Theodore nodded slowly, understanding dawning in his weathered face. What do we do? We use it, Jackson said, but carefully. Back in town, Jackson found Jonathan Hartwell in the hotel restaurant, dining with a man he didn't recognize, elderly, distinguished, with the bearing of old money. Sheriff Foster, Hartwell rose. Allow me to introduce Mr. Andrew Carnegie. He's interested in our situation here. Jackson knew the name. Carnegie was one of the richest men in America, a railroad magnate himself. What was he doing in Silver Creek? Sheriff. Carnegie's handshake was firm despite his age. I understand you're having difficulties with my colleague, Walter Blackwell. Colleague Jackson kept his voice neutral. Former colleague. Carnegie corrected. Walter and I had a falling out over business practices. When I heard about his ventures here, I thought I might investigate. Jackson studied the man. Carnegie's presence changed everything, but whether for better or worse remained to be seen. I appreciate your interest, Mr. Carnegie, but I'm prepared to make a substantial investment in Silver Creek. Carnegie interrupted. Enough to ensure the town's independence, regardless of the railroad's plans. In exchange for, Carnegie smiled, information, evidence, anything that might curtail Walter's ambitions. Before Jackson could respond, Samuel Chen burst through the door. Sheriff, there's been a shooting at Miller's Creek. Benjamin Franklin, the farmer. Not the founding father, he's dead. The scene at Miller's Creek was all too familiar. Benjamin Franklin lay face down in the shallow water, a bullet hole in his back. His son, young Thomas Edison Franklin. His mother had been fond of inventors, knelt beside the body, tears streaming down his face. They came before dawn. Thomas choked out. 6 men, all masked. Pa tried to stop them from digging near the old willow. They just shot him. Dr. Catherine Mitchell arrived. But one look told Jackson she could do nothing for Benjamin. Instead, she tended to Thomas, checking him for shock. Did you recognize any of them? Jackson asked gently. The leader, he had a gold tooth, smiled while he did it. Jackson's jaw tightened. Silas Grant, one of Marcus Blackwell's men, had a gold tooth. Catherine, take Thomas back to town. Find his mother. Jackson turned to Samuel and the gathered farmers. We need to search the area. They found what the killers had been after freshly dug holes along the creek bank. Systematic excavations following the water line. But they'd also left something behind in their haste, a leather satchel containing surveying notes. Look at this. Samuel pointed to the papers. These aren't official railroad surveys. They're from a private mining company, Blackwell Mining Enterprises. The pieces clicked into place. This wasn't about the railroad at all. Blackwell was using his position to claim gold-rich land for his personal ventures. This is it, Jackson said. This is the evidence Hartwell needs. But when they returned to town, they found chaos. The Grand Hotel was surrounded by armed men, not Blackwell's usual thugs, but professionals in matched dusters, Carnegie's bodyguards. Inside, Jackson found Carnegie and Walter Blackwell facing each other across the lobby like gunfighters, though their weapons were words, not bullets. You always did overreach, Walter. Carnegie was saying, using railroad resources for personal gain, the board will be most interested. Blackwell's face was marble. You have no proof. Actually, Jackson interjected, holding up the satchel. We do. The change in Blackwell was instantaneous. The controlled facade cracked, revealing something savage beneath. You don't know what you're interfering with. Foster. I know you murdered Benjamin Franklin for gold that doesn't belong to you. Jackson replied. Marcus Blackwell stepped from behind a pillar, hand on his gun. Careful, Sheriff. That's slander without proof. Thomas Franklin identified your man Silas Grant. Jackson said, gold tooth and all. The word of a grief-stricken boy, Marcus laughed. No court would convict on that. Maybe not, Carnegie said. But the board of directors doesn't require legal proof, just enough doubt to remove a liability. Walter Blackwell's eyes went from Carnegie to Jackson to the gathering crowd of townspeople. Doctor. Mitchell had arrived with Thomas Franklin and his mother. Elizabeth. The boy pointed at the Blackwells with shaking hands. That's them, he said. The younger one was giving orders. Marcus's hand tightened on his pistol. You lying little? Marcus. Walter's voice cracked like a whip. We're leaving. Father. Now. But as they moved toward the door, Elizabeth Franklin stepped forward. The widow's face was streaked with tears, but her voice was steady. You killed my husband. Over gold. Over money. Prove it, Marcus sneered. The shot came from nowhere. Marcus's hat flew off his head. A neat hole punched through the crown. Everyone spun to see Doctor. Mitchell lowering a smoking derringer. The next one won't miss, she said calmly. That's not a threat. Mr. Blackwell, it's a medical opinion. The silence stretched taut. Then Walter Blackwell laughed a sound like breaking glass. Magnificent. You've assembled quite the cast of characters. Foster, the noble sheriff, the warrior doctor, the righteous townspeople. It's like something from a dime novel. He moved toward the door, Marcus trailing reluctantly. But this isn't a story. And you're not heroes. You're obstacles. And I've spent a lifetime removing obstacles. After they left, Jackson turned to Doctor. Mitchell, where did you learn to shoot like that? Boston Women's Shooting Society, she replied, tucking the derringer away. We met every Tuesday. Carnegie clapped slowly. Bravo, but Walter won't retreat easily. You've wounded his pride and Marcus's. They'll retaliate. Then we'd better be ready, Jackson said. The preparations began immediately. Carnegie's men took positions around town while Jackson organized the locals into watches. The evidence was secured in the bank vault, with copies sent by Ryder to the territorial capital. But Blackwell struck from an unexpected direction. That evening, as Jackson made his rounds, Mrs. Henderson flagged him down. Sheriff, Sophie's not feeling well. Started right after supper. Stomach pains, fever. Jackson's blood turned to ice. He ran to the boarding house, finding his daughter curled in bed, face flushed with fever. Doctor. Mitchell was already there, examining her. When did this start? She asked Mrs. Henderson. About an hour ago. She was fine at dinner. Then suddenly... Doctor, Mitchell's expression was grim. Jackson, I need to check something. What did she eat? Same as always. Mrs. Henderson gasped. Oh, Lord. That man. There was a man selling candy to the children this afternoon. Said he was new in town. Sophie bought peppermints. What did he look like? Jackson's voice was deadly quiet. Thin, dark hair, gold tooth. Jackson was out the door before she finished. Silas Grant. They'd poisoned his daughter. Jackson, wait, doctor, Mitchell called. I need to treat her. He stopped, torn between rage and fear. Sophie needed him. Revenge could wait. The next hours were the longest of Jackson's life. Doctor. Mitchell worked tirelessly, inducing vomiting, administering charcoal, fighting to neutralize whatever poison had been used. Sophie drifted in and out of consciousness, calling for her mother. Please, Jackson whispered, holding his daughter's hand. Please don't take her too. Catherine looked up from her work. She's fighting, Jackson. She's strong, like her father. Her father's strength is violence, he said bitterly. What good is that now? Her father's strength, Catherine corrected, is love. That's what's kept you from becoming what Blackwell wanted. That's what will save her now. By dawn, Sophie's fever had broken. She was weak but lucid, reaching for Jackson with trembling hands. Papa, I had bad dreams. It's over now, sweetheart, he promised, though he knew it wasn't. Not yet. Carnegie visited as soon as he heard. "This changes things," he said quietly. "Attacking children. Even the railroad board can't ignore that." "Can you protect her?" Jackson asked. "If I do what needs doing. Can you keep her safe?" "Jackson, no!" Catherine intervened. "This is what Blackwell wants, to make you act from anger, to justify crushing you. He poisoned my daughter." "And she survived." Catherine gripped his shoulders. "Don't let him win by becoming the monster he claims you are." Jonathan Hartwell arrived with federal marshals that afternoon. "We're arresting Marcus Blackwell for the murder of Benjamin Franklin. We have enough evidence for trial." "What about the poisoning?" "Without proof of who sold the candy." Hartwell shook his head. "But this is a start." The arrest didn't go smoothly. Marcus barricaded himself in the hotel with his father and their men for hours. The standoff continued, neither side willing to fire the first shot. Then, as tensions reached breaking point, an unexpected voice rang out. Samuel Chen's wife, Martha, walked calmly between the two groups, carrying a tea service. "Gentlemen," she announced, "it's tea time. In civilized society, we pause for tea." The absurdity of it broke the tension. Even Walter Blackwell seemed nonplussed as Martha set up her service on a table in the street, pouring with steady hands. "Mr. Blackwell," she said conversationally, "your son has a choice. He can surrender with dignity, or be dragged out like a common criminal. Which would you prefer?" It was brilliant, by framing it as a matter of dignity rather than force. She'd given them a way to retreat without losing face. Walter studied her, then nodded slowly. "Marcus, we'll handle this legally." Marcus emerged, allowing himself to be arrested with minimal protest. But as the marshals led him away, he locked eyes with Jackson. "This isn't over," he promised. "Not until you're dead or gone." That night, with Sophie sleeping safely and guards posted, Jackson finally allowed himself a moment of vulnerability. He found Catherine in her office, cleaning instruments by lamplight. "Thank you," he said simply. "For Sophie, for everything." She looked up, seeing something in his face that made her set down her work. "Jackson, what are you planning?" "Carnegie's offered to take Sophie back east. Good schools, safety, a future away from all this." "You're sending her away." "A sheriff's daughter shouldn't have to fear poisoned candy." His voice broke slightly. "I failed to protect her." Catherine moved closer. "You saved her by staying with her instead of seeking revenge. That's not failure. That's the hardest choice a parent can make." "I wanted to kill them all," he admitted. "When I thought I might lose her, I would have painted this town red." "But you didn't." She touched his face gently. "That's the difference between you and them. You choose love over violence, even when it costs everything." The moment stretched between them, heavy with possibility. Then Jackson spoke the words that had been building since she'd faced down Marcus in the hotel. "I can't do this alone anymore," he whispered. "You're not alone," she replied. "You never were." The kiss was gentle, a promise rather than passion. When they parted, something had shifted, a decision made without words. Outside, Silver Creek slept uneasily. The battle was won, but the war continued. Walter Blackwell remained free, his resources vast, his anger focused. Marcus would likely escape serious punishment with his father's influence. But things had changed. Carnegie's involvement meant Blackwell couldn't act with impunity. The town had proven it would stand together, and Jackson had found something he'd thought lost forever, someone who saw him not as the weapon he'd been, but as the man he was trying to become. Over the next days, normalcy slowly returned. The federal investigation continued, uncovering more evidence of Blackwell's schemes. Several of his men fled rather than face questioning. The mining operation at Miller's Creek was suspended pending legal review. But Jackson knew it was the calm before the storm. Blackwell hadn't survived this long by accepting defeat. he would strike back, harder and more viciously than before. The question was whether Silver Creek and Jackson himself could survive what was coming. One evening, as Jackson tucked Sophie into bed, she asked, "Papa, why do bad people try to hurt good people?" He considered his answer carefully. Sometimes people want things so badly they forget what's right. They think winning is more important than how they win. But you don't think that. I used to, he admitted. During the war, winning was all that mattered, but your mother taught me different. She showed me that how we live matters more than whether we win. Sophie nodded solemnly. Is that why you didn't hurt the men who made me sick? Yes, sweetheart, though it was the hardest thing I've ever done. Harder than being a soldier. Much harder. Being violent is easy. Choosing not to be, that takes real strength. As she drifted to sleep, Jackson stood watch by her window. Somewhere out there, Blackwell was planning his next move. But for now, in this moment, his daughter was safe. The woman he was growing to love was near, and the town he'd sworn to protect stood firm. It wasn't peace, not yet, but it was enough. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new threats, new choices between the man he'd been and the man he was becoming. But tonight, Jackson Foster allowed himself to hope that love might truly be stronger than violence, that a town's courage could defeat an empire's greed, and that even the darkest past could be redeemed by choosing a better future. The gold in Miller's Creek glittered beneath the water, waiting, but its true value, Jackson was learning, lay not in wealth, but in what people were willing to do or refused to do to claim it. The smoke was visible from Main Street, a black column rising against the afternoon sky like an accusation. Jackson Foster was already running when the school bell began its frantic clanging, not the measured toll of dismissal, but the wild, desperate ringing of alarm. "The school!" someone screamed. "The school's on fire!" Jackson's world narrowed to a single thought. Sophie, his daughter, was in that building, along with 24 other children. His boots pounded against the dusty street as townsfolk scattered from his path. The scene that greeted him was from a nightmare. Flames licked from the windows of Silver Creek's one-room schoolhouse, smoke pouring through the gaps in its wooden walls, children huddled outside, some crying, others standing in shocked silence. The teacher, Miss Florence Nightingale, a young woman from Connecticut who'd taken the town's education as her personal mission, was frantically counting heads. "Sophie," Jackson grabbed her shoulders. "Where's Sophie?" Florence's soot-stained face went white. "She went back. She said little Abraham and Sarah were still inside." Jackson didn't hear the rest. He was already moving, stripping off his coat as he ran. The front door hung askew, flames visible beyond. Without hesitation, he plunged inside. The smoke hit him like a physical blow, thick and choking. He dropped to his knees, crawling beneath the worst of it. "Sophie, Sophie, answer me." A child's cough led him deeper into the inferno. He found them huddled beneath Florence's desk, Sophie with her arms around 2 younger children, Abraham Lincoln Johnson and Sarah Roosevelt Williams, both barely 6 years old. "Papa," Sophie's voice was hoarse but strong. "The door got stuck. We couldn't—" "It's all right, sweetheart. I'm here." Jackson gathered all 3 children, knowing he couldn't make multiple trips. The building groaned ominously above them. "Hold tight and keep your faces down." The journey back seemed endless. The smoke was thicker now, the heat intense. Jackson's lungs screamed for clean air, but he forced himself forward. A burning beam crashed down inches from them, showering sparks. Sarah screamed, burying her face in his shoulder. Then, blessed coolness. Hands reached to take the children as Jackson stumbled from the building. He collapsed to his knees, coughing violently, as Catherine Mitchell appeared beside him. "Don't try to talk," she ordered, pressing a wet cloth to his face. "Breathe slowly." But Jackson pushed past her, needing to see Sophie was there, dirty and scared but whole. Abraham and Sarah's parents swept them up with tears of relief. The schoolhouse collapsed behind them with a sound like thunder, taking with it any evidence of how the fire started. "Papa saved us," Sophie told everyone who would listen, her voice filled with pride that cut Jackson to the bone. He'd saved her. Yes, but only because someone had tried to kill her. Again. As Catherine tended to the children's smoke inhalation, Jackson studied the scene. The fire had started simultaneously in multiple places. No accident could explain the even spread of flames around the building's perimeter. This was arson, deliberate and carefully planned. Samuel Chen appeared at his elbow. "Sheriff, you need to hear this. Young Thomas Edison Franklin saw riders leaving the school just before the fire started." "How many?" "3, moving fast toward the Blackwell Ranch." Jackson's jaw tightened. First poison, now fire. Blackwell was escalating, targeting children to break the town's will. The man he'd been during the war would have ridden to the ranch and ended this with bullets. But Sophie was watching him, trusting him to be better than that. Andrew Carnegie arrived as the crowd dispersed, his usual composure shaken. "This is monstrous, even for Walter." "Can you prove he ordered it?" Jonathan Hartwell asked, joining them. The federal investigator looked haggard. The legal proceedings against Marcus had stalled, mired in technicalities and well-paid lawyers. "Proof," Jackson laughed bitterly. 3 riders seen leaving the scene, heading for Blackwell's ranch. The fire set right when the wind would spread it fastest. Who else would— "That's not evidence," Hartwell interrupted. "It's circumstantial at best. Children could have died." "I know." Hartwell's voice was heavy. "But without witnesses, without physical evidence." Jackson walked away before he said something he'd regret. He found Catherine treating the last of the smoke-affected students, her hands gentle but efficient. "2 of the children are saying something strange," she told him quietly. "They claim they heard the door being barred from outside before the fire started." "Which children?" "Abraham and Sarah, the one Sophie saved." Jackson knelt beside the children, keeping his voice soft. "Can you tell me what you heard?" Little Abraham looked at his mother for permission, then nodded. "We were practicing letters when we heard hammering. Sarah went to look, but the door wouldn't open." "Someone laughed," Sarah added in a whisper. "A mean laugh. Then we smelled smoke." Hammering. The door barred from outside. This wasn't just arson, it was attempted murder of children. Jackson felt something cold and deadly settle in his chest. That evening, an emergency town meeting filled the hall to capacity. Anger rippled through the crowd like heat lightning. Parents clutched their children close, fear mixing with rage in equal measure. "How much more do we take?" shouted George Washington Carver, the town's blacksmith. "First, they poisoned the sheriff's girl. Now they try to burn our children alive." "We should ride on the Blackwell Ranch tonight," suggested Napoleon Bonaparte Smith, whose grandson had been in the school. "End this before they kill someone." The crowd roared approval, but Jackson stood, raising his hands for silence. Violence is what Blackwell wants. It gives him excuse to call in troops. Declare martial law. "Then, what do you suggest?" "Sheriff," this from Elizabeth Franklin, Benjamin's widow, "wait until they succeed in murdering our babies." Before Jackson could answer, the doors burst open. Marcus Blackwell strode in, flanked by 6 armed men. He'd been released on bail that morning, his father's money talking louder than justice. "Murderer!" someone shouted. The crowd surged forward, but Jackson stepped between them and Marcus. "Turn around and leave," he told Marcus. "Now." Marcus smiled, the expression not reaching his eyes. "This is a public meeting. Sheriff, I have every right to attend." He raised his voice. "Besides, I have an announcement. My father wishes to express his shock and sorrow at today's tragic accident." "Accident?" Florence Nightingale pushed through the crowd. "3 of my students saw riders leaving?" "Saw riders," Marcus interrupted. "Not their faces, not their actions. For all anyone knows, They were good Samaritans who spotted the fire and rode for help. "You lying snake." George Carver stepped forward, fists clenched. Marcus's hand dropped to his gun. "Careful, blacksmith. Threatening me would be unwise." The tension crackled like lightning about to strike. Then a small voice cut through it all. "You're the one who laughed." Everyone turned. Little Sarah Williams stood beside her mother, pointing at Marcus with a trembling finger. "When the door wouldn't open, you laughed. I know your laugh." Marcus's face went white, then red. "You're mistaken, child. I was at the ranch all day." "No." Abraham joined in, moving to stand beside his friend. "It was you. You smell like expensive tobacco, same as outside the door." The crowd's murmur grew to a roar. Marcus backed toward the exit, his men forming a protective wall. "The word of children," he sneered. "Confused, frightened children. No court would—" "Maybe not," Jackson said quietly. "But this isn't a court. This is a town that's had enough." He took a step forward, and Marcus drew his pistol. The mechanical click of hammers being cocked filled the room as 24 townspeople aimed their own weapons. "You pull that trigger," Jackson continued, his voice deadly calm. "And nothing will save you. Not your father, not his money, not all his influence. You threaten me. I inform you, leave now, while you can. Don't come back to Silver Creek, ever." For a long moment, they stood frozen. Then Walter Blackwell's voice rang from the doorway. "Lower your weapon, Marcus." The elder Blackwell entered, leaning on his silver-headed cane. His eyes swept the room, taking in the armed townspeople, the frightened children, the rage on every face. "My son was indeed at the ranch today," he said smoothly. "I can provide 12 witnesses." "Paid witnesses," someone muttered. Walter's smile was cold. "Prove otherwise." He turned to Marcus. "We're leaving. Now." As they retreated, Walter paused beside Jackson. "You've chosen your path. Foster, remember I offered you a chance to do this peacefully." "Peacefully," Jackson's control finally cracked. "You tried to murder children. My daughter—" "I've tried nothing," Walter interrupted. "Whatever happened today was unfortunate, but hardly my responsibility. However," he leaned closer, "what comes next will be—" They left in a thunder of hoofbeats, but their threat lingered like smoke in the air. The townspeople looked to Jackson, fear and determination warring in their faces. "What do we do now, Sheriff?" Florence asked. "We protect ourselves," Jackson replied. "Post guards at all public buildings. No child walks alone. Anyone sees riders approaching. They ring the church bell." "For how long?" someone asked. "We can't live under siege forever." "For as long as it takes," Catherine said, stepping beside Jackson. "The federal investigation continues. Mr. Carnegie has influence. We're not alone in this." But as the meeting dispersed, Jackson knew they were running out of time. Blackwell was escalating, becoming desperate. Desperate men did terrible things. That night, unable to sleep, Jackson sat on his porch, rifle across his knees. Catherine joined him, bringing coffee and companionship. "You can't guard the whole town yourself," she said gently. "I can try." "Jackson!" She set down her cup. "What happened today, Sophie running back into that fire? She was being you, trying to save everyone, regardless of the cost." "That terrifies me more than Blackwell." "It should, but it also shows what kind of person you've raised. Brave, selfless, protective of others." She touched his hand. "Those aren't the qualities of a killer's daughter." "Aren't they?" Jackson stared into the darkness. "The only difference between a hero and a killer is who they're pointed at." "No," Catherine said firmly. "The difference is choice. Sophie chose to save those children when she could have saved herself." just like you chose to save them all instead of seeking revenge. That's not violence, that's love. Before Jackson could respond, the church bell began to toll. Not the frantic clanging of alarm, but slow, measured strikes. Once, twice, 3 times. Fire bell. Jackson was already moving. 3 strikes means... The explosion lit up the night sky, turning darkness to terrible day. The bank's Silver Creek's bank erupted in a ball of flame that shattered windows 3 blocks away. Jackson ran toward the inferno, knowing what he'd find. The bank where they'd stored the evidence against Blackwell, the proof of his illegal mining operation. The documents that could have brought him down, all consumed in flames that reached toward the stars like grasping fingers. The town fought the fire with bucket brigades and determination, but it was hopeless. The explosion had been too thorough, the flames too fierce. By dawn, only smoking ruins remained. Thomas Jefferson, the bank manager, not the president, stood among the ashes of his life's work. The safe survived, but it was empty. Someone cleared it out before the explosion. "Inside job," Samuel said grimly. "Someone with access." Jackson thought of Walter Blackwell's confident smile. His certainty that evidence didn't matter. How many people in Silver Creek might turn for enough gold? Carnegie arrived as the sun rose, his face grim. "This changes things. Without that evidence." "The federal case collapses," Hartwell finished. "I'm sorry. Sheriff, my hands are tied." "So Blackwell wins?" Florence asked, her voice bitter. "He burns our school, our bank, threatens our children, and walks free." "The law requires proof," Hartwell said helplessly. "Then maybe it's time to consider other options," Napoleon Smith suggested darkly. The crowd murmured agreement. Jackson saw the mood shifting. Fear turning to rage, law giving way to mob justice. This was how towns died, not from outside violence, but from the poison of becoming what they fought against. "No," he said firmly. "We're not vigilantes. We're not murderers." "Then what are we?" George Carver demanded. "Victim sheep waiting for slaughter." "We're better than them." Sophie's young voice rang out. She stood beside Catherine, small but fierce. "Papa taught me that being good is harder than being bad, but it's what makes us different." The crowd quieted, shamed by a child's wisdom. But Jackson saw the doubt in their eyes. How long before fear overcame principle? How long before Silver Creek became everything it had stood against? That evening, as Catherine treated those injured fighting the fire, she found Jackson staring at the ruins of the bank. "I'm sending Sophie away," he said without preamble. "Carnegie's offer good schools, safety, a normal life. She deserves that. She deserves her father. Her father is the reason she's in danger." His voice was raw. "Every threat, every attack, it's because of me, because of what I am." "What you were," Catherine corrected. "Jackson, sending her away won't stop Blackwell. It'll just break both your hearts. Better broken hearts than a dead child." Catherine turned him to face her. "Is that what Mary would want? For you to give up your daughter out of fear?" "Don't," the word came out sharp. "Don't use her memory. Someone has to. You're so busy trying to honor your promise about violence that you're forgetting her other lessons. About family, about standing together, about love being worth fighting for." "Fighting," Jackson laughed bitterly. "Always comes back to fighting." "Not that kind of fighting." Catherine's eyes blazed. "Fighting with courage, with intelligence, with community. Fighting by refusing to let evil drive you apart." A rider interrupted them, galloping hard from the east. He nearly fell from his horse, gasping out his message. "Sheriff Miller's Creek, they've brought in machines, steam shovels, dozens of men. They're tearing up everything, even the graves." Jackson's blood went cold. The desecration Blackwell had threatened was beginning, but more than that, if they were moving this openly, this quickly... "He's not waiting for legal approval," Jackson realized. He's taking it all now, before anyone can stop him. Can he do that? Florence asked, having overheard. Possession is 9/10 of the law, Hartwell said grimly. If he establishes mining operations, claims the gold, it'll take years of legal battles to undo. Years the town doesn't have. Then we stop him, George Carver said. Tonight. With what? Jackson demanded. 30 townsmen against professional gunfighters. It'll be a massacre. Better than surrender, Napoleon countered. The argument might have continued, but Sophie tugged on Jackson's sleeve. Papa, what would a smart soldier do? Not a violent one, but a smart one. Jackson looked at his daughter, brave, clever, too wise for her years, and suddenly, like sun breaking through storm clouds, he saw it. A smart soldier, he said slowly, would make the enemy defeat himself. He turned to the gathered townspeople. How many of you have family in other towns, friends who might spread word? Most of us, Florence said. Why? Because Blackwell's not the only one who can play the public opinion game. Jackson's mind raced with possibilities. Carnegie, can you get journalists here from San Francisco, Denver, anywhere with a newspaper? The industrialist's eyes gleamed with understanding. Within days, but Blackwell won't stand idle while. He won't have a choice, Jackson interrupted. Not if we're smart about this. He outlined his plan, watching hope kindle in exhausted faces. It was dangerous, requiring courage of a different kind than violence, but it might work. As the crowd dispersed to begin preparations, Catherine caught his arm. This is the man Mary fell in love with. Not the killer, not the weapon, but the protector who finds another way. It might not work, he warned. But you're trying. That's what Sophie will remember, not that you were perfect, but that you never stopped trying to be better. The next morning brought unexpected allies. A delegation from the Arapaho Reservation, led by Chief Joseph Standing Bear, rode into Silver Creek. They'd heard about the desecration of their sacred burial grounds at Miller's Creek. Sheriff Foster, the chief said formally, we offer our support, not with weapons, but with witness. Let the world see what these men do to holy ground. It was perfect. Jackson had hoped for town support, but the moral weight of Native American graves being destroyed for gold that would resonate far beyond Silver Creek. By evening, the first journalists arrived, drawn by Carnegie's influence and the promise of scandal. They found a town united in purpose, documenting every violation, every threat, every abuse of power. Blackwell's response was swift and predictable. Marcus led riders to intimidate the newcomers, but found them protected by townspeople and witnessed by other journalists. Every threat was recorded, every violent gesture noted. You think this matters? Marcus snarled at Jackson outside the hotel. A few scribblers with notebooks. Words can be more powerful than bullets. Jackson replied, Your father taught me that. Marcus's hand twitched toward his gun, but the presence of watching journalists stayed him. He was trapped by the very legitimacy his father claimed to represent. That night, as Jackson walked his rounds, he found Sophie and Catherine at the temporary school Florence had established in the church. Learning never stops, Florence explained, even when buildings burn. Sophie ran to him, clutching a paper. I wrote about today, Papa, about how the whole town stood together. Miss Catherine says that's called history. Living history, Catherine added, the kind that matters. Jackson read his daughter's careful words, the simple sentences that captured more truth than any official report. This was what they were fighting for, not gold or land, but the right of children to learn, to grow, to hope. A commotion outside drew them to the windows. Torches bobbed in the darkness, dozens of them, converging on the church. But as they emerged to face this new threat, Jackson realized these weren't Blackwell's men. They were townspeople from Silver Creek's neighbors Willow Bend, Sagebrush, even far-off Cedar Falls. Word had spread, and they'd come to stand with Silver Creek. Heard you might need some support, "Sheriff," called out John Adams from Willow Bend. "Seems like if it can happen to you, it can happen to any of us." The crowd swelled, voices raised not in anger but in solidarity. They sang hymns, told stories, created a circle of light that pushed back the darkness. Blackwell's men watched from the shadows, outnumbered and uncertain. It wasn't violence that won that night, but community. The journalists scribbled frantically, capturing a story that would spread across the territory and beyond a town that refused to be broken. Citizens who chose courage over fear. But Jackson knew this was just the beginning. Blackwell wouldn't accept defeat easily. The morning would bring new challenges, new threats. But for tonight, Silver Creek stood united. Proof that sometimes the greatest strength came not from guns or gold, but from people who refused to let evil win. As he tucked Sophie into bed later, she asked, "Papa, are we winning?" Jackson considered the question. "We're surviving, sweetheart. And we're doing it the right way. Sometimes that's the biggest victory of all." "Mama would be proud," Sophie said sleepily. "Yes," Jackson agreed, his throat tight. "She would." Outside, Catherine stood watch, rifle in hand but heart committed to healing. The town slept uneasily, knowing tomorrow would bring new battles. But they'd learned something important. They were stronger together than apart. And that strength came not from violence, but from the courage to stand for what was right. The war for Silver Creek's soul was far from over. But tonight, at least, the light had pushed back the darkness. The afternoon sun cast long shadows across Catherine's makeshift hospital as she tended to the wounded from the morning's confrontation. 3 miners from Blackwell's operation had been brought in, victims of a cave-in at Miller's Creek that many suspected wasn't entirely accidental. She worked on them with the same careful attention she gave everyone, though their employer would have seen her town destroyed. Jackson stood in the doorway, watching her gentle efficiency. 2 weeks had passed since the journalist descended on Silver Creek, and the pressure was taking its toll on everyone. But Catherine remained steady, a fixed point of calm in the storm. "The Blackwell boy?" she asked without looking up. Sensing his presence, "Holed up at the Grand Hotel with his father? They've been quiet since the newspapers started printing stories." "Too quiet." She finished bandaging the miner's ribs. "Men like Walter Blackwell don't simply accept defeat." Before Jackson could respond, Sophie burst through the door, followed by Florence Nightingale. Both were breathless from running. "Papa, Miss Catherine?" Sophie gasped. "There's a lady at the hotel. She says she's Marcus Blackwell's mother." Jackson and Catherine exchanged glances. Walter's wife had died years ago, or so everyone believed. "Did she give a name?" Jackson asked. "Victoria," Florence supplied. "Victoria Blackwell. She arrived on the noon stage, demanded to see her son." The implications sent Jackson's mind racing. If Marcus's mother was alive, why had she stayed away? And why appear now? At the Grand Hotel, they found a crowd gathered outside. Through the window, Jackson could see an elegant woman in traveling clothes facing down Walter Blackwell. Her bearing spoke of old money and older steel. 20 years, Walter," her voice carried clearly through the glass. 20 years you let me think our son was dead." "Victoria." Walter's usual control seemed shaken. "This is neither the time nor—" "The time?" she laughed, but there was no humor in it. "I read the newspapers. Walter, our son trying to burn children alive. This is what you've made of him." Marcus stood frozen between his parents, confusion and something like hope warring on his face. "Mother, but father said you died when I was born." Another lie. Victoria's eyes never left Walter. "He took you from me. Said a woman of my delicate sensibilities couldn't raise a son properly. Had me committed to a sanitarium for hysteria when I tried to fight him." The crowd murmured. Even in 1878, such practices were known but spoken of in whispers. Catherine's hand found Jackson's arm, gripping tight. "You're ill," Walter said smoothly, recovering his composure. These delusions. Are they? Victoria produced a sheaf of papers. Release documents. Medical records showing no illness beyond a mother's grief. Letters from lawyers documenting your payments to keep me confined. She turned to the crowd. I escaped 3 months ago. It took this long to find you. To discover what you'd done with my baby. Marcus took a step toward her, then stopped. This is impossible. You're lying. Am I? Victoria's voice softened. You have a birthmark shaped like a crescent moon on your left shoulder. When you were 3 months old, you'd only sleep if I sang Barbara Allen. Your first word was bird. You were watching a cardinal through the nursery window. Marcus's hand went unconsciously to his shoulder. His face had gone pale. Enough of this theatricality. Walter snapped. Marcus, we're leaving. No. The word was quiet, but firm. For the first time Jackson could remember, Marcus defied his father directly. I want to hear what she has to say. What followed was a tale of cruelty wrapped in legal paperwork. Victoria had been young, idealistic, believing she'd married for love. But Walter had wanted her inheritance and connections. When she'd proven too independent, too unwilling to bend to his will, he'd used the law against her. The doctors said I was hysterical for wanting to raise my own child, she said bitterly. That my insistence on breastfeeding rather than hiring a wet nurse showed dangerous radical tendencies. Your father had 3 physicians swear I was unfit. Catherine couldn't stay silent. The medical establishment's treatment of women is a disgrace. I've seen too many healthy women declared hysterical for showing any independence. Victoria looked at her gratefully. You're the lady, doctor. I've heard about you. She turned back to Marcus. I tried to find you, every day for 20 years, but your father was always one step ahead, moving you from school to school, city to city. This is ancient history. Walter interrupted. Even if true, it changes nothing about our current situation. Doesn't it? Victoria's smile was sharp. You've built your empire on lies and cruelty. Walter used our son as a weapon, just as you used me as a stepping stone, but I'm not the frightened girl you locked away. She turned to the crowd, to the journalists scribbling notes. I've come to offer testimony about Walter Blackwell's character, about the man who would steal your town as easily as he stole a child from his mother. The crowd's energy shifted. This wasn't just about land rights anymore. It was about fundamental wrongs, about power abused on the most personal level. Marcus stood as if struck by lightning. You told me she abandoned us, that she didn't want me. I told you what you needed to hear to become strong. Walter replied coldly. Strong, Marcus's voice cracked. You made me into a monster, made me believe I had to be cruel to be respected. Sentiment is weakness. Sentiment is human, Marcus shouted. All my life, you've taught me to despise weakness, to crush opposition, to take what I want. And why? Because you couldn't bear the thought of a woman defying you. The confrontation might have escalated, but Jackson noticed movement in his peripheral vision. Riders approaching fast from the east, dust clouds marking their urgency. Trouble, he murmured to Catherine. The lead rider was Theodore Roosevelt, the prospector, not the future president, and his face was grim. Sheriff, they've struck water at Miller's Creek, but that's not all. The diggings undermine the whole eastern bank. If it collapses. The cemetery. Chief Standing Bear finished. He'd arrived with his own scouts. The sacred burial grounds will wash away. Jackson's mind raced, whether by accident or design. Blackwell's mining operation threatened to destroy the very thing they'd claimed to respect. How long? He asked. Hours, maybe less if they keep digging. Jackson turned to address the crowd, but Victoria Blackwell beat him to it. Is this your legacy, Walter? She demanded. Destroying graves for gold, teaching our son that nothing matters but winning? Business requires difficult decisions. Walter began, business. Sophie pushed through the crowd to stand before him, small but fierce. My mama's buried in that cemetery. She wasn't rich or important, but she mattered to us. Doesn't that count for anything? The simple question from a child's lips seemed to echo in the sudden silence. Even Walter Blackwell appeared momentarily at a loss. Then Catherine stepped forward. "There's another way. There always is, if we're willing to look for it." "What do you propose?" Dr. Carnegie asked. He'd been watching quietly from the hotel porch. "Shore up the bank, divert the water. It's engineering, not warfare." She looked at the miners who'd gathered to watch the confrontation. "How many of you know how to build as well as dig?" Hands went up, dozens of them. These were men who'd built railroads, bridges, entire towns from nothing. "But why would we help?" one called out. "Blackwell pays our wages." "Because you're fathers too," Catherine replied. "Brothers, sons. Do you want to be remembered as the men who washed away a cemetery for gold, or the ones who saved it?" Jackson saw the moment the tide turned. It started with one miner stepping forward, Otto von Bismarck, a German immigrant who'd lost his own family. Then another, and another. "This is mutiny," Walter snarled. "You're all fired." "Then we're free to help," Otto replied simply. What followed was remarkable. The same men who'd been tearing apart Miller's Creek that morning now worked to save it, using techniques learned in a dozen mining camps. They began the delicate work of stabilizing the bank. Jackson found himself working beside Marcus Blackwell, who'd shed his fine coat and taken up a shovel. "Why?" Jackson asked during a brief rest. Marcus glanced to where his mother was helping organize supplies. 20 years of believing a lie, 20 years of becoming something based on that lie. Maybe it's time to try being someone else. Change isn't easy. Neither is living with yourself when you've done what I've done. Marcus met his eyes. "I owe you an apology." "Sheriff, several, actually." "Save it for after we save the cemetery," Jackson replied, but there was less hardness in his voice. As the sun began to set, the work reached a critical point. The undermined bank groaned ominously, held in place only by hastily constructed supports. "We need more time," Otto called out. "The supports won't hold if—" A sharp crack cut him off. One of the main timbers had split, and the bank began to slide. "Everyone back," Jackson shouted, but Catherine was already moving forward. "The drainage channel isn't complete. If we don't finish it now, we lose everything." She grabbed a shovel, attacking the remaining earth with desperate energy. Others followed Jackson, Marcus, even young Sophie wielding a spade too large for her. "Together," Chief Standing Bear called out, and his people joined the effort, along with townspeople, miners, everyone united in common purpose. The bank shifted again, earth falling away in chunks, but the channel was growing, inch by desperate inch. "Almost there," Catherine gasped, covered in mud and sweat. The final barrier gave way just as the bank began its final collapse. Water rushed through the new channel, diverted away from the cemetery. The sacred ground held, saved by the narrowest margin. A cheer went up, but it was exhausted rather than triumphant. They'd won, but barely. As people collapsed where they stood, sharing water and tired smiles, Victoria Blackwell approached her son. Marcus stood frozen, uncertain. "I don't know how to have a mother," he said quietly. "And I don't know how to have a grown son," she replied. "But perhaps we can learn together." The embrace was awkward, 20 years of separation making strangers of blood, but it was a beginning. Jackson found Catherine sitting on a boulder, watching the sunset paint the saved cemetery in shades of gold. "That was incredibly brave," he said, settling beside her. "Also incredibly foolish." "Sounds familiar," she smiled tiredly. "A certain sheriff I know has a similar habit." They sat in comfortable silence, aware of but not acknowledging the growing connection between them. Sophie appeared, squeezing between them with the unconscious entitlement of childhood. "We did it," she announced. "We saved Mama's resting place." "We did," Jackson agreed, pulling her close. Does this mean the bad men will stop trying to hurt us? Jackson and Catherine exchanged glances over her head. Walter Blackwell still stood with his remaining supporters, his empire crumbling but his ambition intact. This victory was significant but not final. I think, Catherine said carefully, it means people saw that working together is stronger than fighting apart. That's important. Miss Catherine? Sophie's voice was thoughtful. Are you going to stay in Silver Creek even after the trouble's done? Catherine looked at Jackson as she answered, I think I've found reasons to stay. As night fell, the strange alliance began to dissolve. Miners drifted back to their camps, townspeople to their homes, but something had changed. The lines between enemies and allies had blurred, creating new possibilities. Marcus approached Jackson one last time. My father won't give up. He'll find another way, another angle. I know. I could help, provide information, documents, try to make amends for what I've done. Jackson studied him. The arrogance was gone, replaced by something raw and uncertain. That's a dangerous path. Your father doesn't forgive betrayal. Neither do burned children. Marcus replied quietly. I hear their screams in my dreams. See that little girl pointing at me, naming me for what I am. What you were, Catherine corrected. Joining them. What you choose to be tomorrow is what matters now. Marcus nodded slowly. Then tomorrow, I choose to be better. As the Blackwells' father, mother, and son returned to the hotel for what would undoubtedly be a difficult conversation, Jackson allowed himself a moment of hope, not for easy victory, but for the possibility that even the deepest wounds might heal. Papa, Sophie tugged at his hand. I'm glad we saved the cemetery, but I'm more glad nobody got hurt doing it. Me too, sweetheart. Is that what Mama meant about finding another way? Jackson lifted his daughter, holding her close. Yes, Sophie, that's exactly what she meant. The stars emerged one by one, looking down on a town that had chosen cooperation over conflict, that had proved change was possible even for those who seemed lost to darkness. But tomorrow would bring new challenges. Walter Blackwell's empire was wounded, but not destroyed. The gold beneath Miller's Creek still glittered with temptation, and the fragile alliance forged in mud and desperation would be tested by the harsh light of day. For tonight, though, Silver Creek could rest in the knowledge that they'd saved something precious, not through violence, but through the simple act of working together. It wasn't the end of their trials, but it was proof that another way existed. As Jackson carried Sophie home, Catherine walking beside them, he thought of Mary and the promise he'd made. Today, he'd kept it in the truest way possible, not by refusing to fight, but by finding something better to fight for. The war for Silver Creek's soul continued, but the battlefield had shifted. Now it would be fought in courtrooms and newspapers, in the choices of individuals discovering they could change, and in the stubborn hope of a community that refused to surrender to despair. And at the heart of it all, a sheriff, a doctor, and a child, proving that love could indeed be stronger than violence, that redemption was possible even in the darkest hearts, and that sometimes the greatest courage lay not in drawing a gun, but in putting it aside to pick up a shovel. The night was peaceful, but it was the peace of gathering strength, not final victory. Tomorrow would come with all its challenges. But tonight, for a few precious hours, Silver Creek could breathe and hope and believe in the possibility of a better day. The mist hung heavy over the cemetery as Jackson Foster made his way through the weathered headstones. Dawn was still an hour away, but he couldn't sleep. Too many ghosts walked these paths, both from his past and from the recent troubles that had nearly destroyed this sacred ground. He found the grave he sought a simple marker bearing the name Unknown Soldier, C.S.A., one of many who'd died far from home, buried by enemies who'd shown more mercy in death than life. Jackson knew better. He knew the name William Sullivan, his handler during the war's darkest operations. Should have known you'd survived, Jackson said to the morning air. You always were too stubborn to die. As were you, Captain Foster. The voice came from behind a large monument. William Sullivan stepped into view, older but still carrying himself with a soldier's bearing. Though I hear it's sheriff now. Jackson's hand hovered near his gun, old instincts screaming danger. Sullivan had been Walter Blackwell's right hand during the war, the one who'd passed along the bloodiest orders. Easy, Jackson. I'm not here for violence. Sullivan held his hands visible. Haven't been for some time. You've been watching. Someone had to. When I heard Walter was coming here, targeting you. Sullivan shrugged. Old debts. What debts? We were never friends. No, but you saved my life at Chancellorsville. Dragged me from that burning church when you could have let me die. Sullivan's scarred face showed something that might have been regret. I've carried that weight for 16 years. Jackson studied his former enemy, looking for deception. You're the one who's been feeding information to the journalists, the details about Blackwell's operations. Among other things, Sullivan moved closer, still careful. Walter's lost himself. Jackson, what we did in the war that was duty. However dark, this is just greed. And Marcus, the boy's been twisted by his father's ambitions, though recent events suggest he might be salvageable. Sullivan glanced toward town, where lights were beginning to appear. His mother's arrival changes things. Victoria always had steel in her spine. Why reveal yourself now? Because Walter's planning something that makes everything else look like child's play. Sullivan's voice dropped. He's hired guns from Kansas, the Dalton boys, though they're using false names. They'll be here within days. Jackson's blood chilled. The Daltons were known killers, men who'd make Marcus's cruelty look tame. How many? 15, maybe 20. Enough to take the town by force. Sullivan met his eyes. He's done playing games. Jackson, when the legal routes failed, when his son turned against him. Something snapped. He wants to punish everyone, you, the town, even Marcus. And you're telling me this why? Because I've seen enough bloodshed. Because that debt from Chancellorsville has weighed on me. Sullivan reached into his coat, moving slowly, and produced a leather folder. Guard rotations, arrival times, planned positions, everything you need to prepare. Jackson took the folder, still wary. This could be a trap. Could be, Sullivan agreed. But ask yourself, would Walter use me for bait when he has better options? The man never valued loyalty he couldn't buy. As if to prove his point, voices drifted from the eastern path. Jackson and Sullivan both melted into the shadows between monuments, old training taking over. Walter Blackwell appeared, walking with two men Jackson didn't recognize. Their bearing marked them as gunfighters, professionals who killed for pay. Cemetery at noon, Walter was saying. Foster has a sentimental attachment to this place. He'll come if challenged. And if he doesn't? One of the gunmen asked. Then we burn it, every last marker. Let the town see what defiance costs. What about your son? He's been talking to the Federals. Walter's face was stone. Marcus made his choice. He's no longer my concern. The trio passed, unaware of the listening ears. Jackson felt sick. A father willing to sacrifice his own son had passed beyond reason into madness. After they left, Sullivan emerged from hiding. You see, the Walter Blackwell I served is gone. What's left is just appetite and rage. Help us, Jackson said suddenly. You know his tactics, his weaknesses. Help us stop this without a massacre. Sullivan was quiet for a long moment. I'm tired of blood, Jackson. Tired of being the weapon in another man's hand. He looked at the false grave that bore his name. Perhaps it's time William Sullivan truly died and someone better took his place. They shook hands among the graves, former enemies united by the strange turnings of fate. Back in town, Jackson found organized chaos. Word of the approaching threat had spread, and the townspeople were preparing, but it wasn't the grim arming for war he'd expected. Instead, Catherine had established a medical station. Florence was organizing evacuation plans for children and elderly, and Samuel Chen was coordinating with Carnegie's security men. "We're not going to meet violence with violence," Catherine said when Jackson questioned the preparations. "We're going to be smarter than that." "Catherine, these aren't local toughs. The Daltons are men who expect traditional resistance," she interrupted. "What if we give them something else?" Before Jackson could ask what she meant, Marcus Blackwell arrived, accompanied by his mother. The young man looked haggard, as if he'd aged years overnight. "Sheriff, I need to warn you. My father—" "We know," Jackson said. "The question is what you're prepared to do about it." Marcus straightened. "Whatever's necessary. I've sent telegrams to every newspaper in the territory, telling them what's coming. By tomorrow, there'll be 50 journalists here to witness whatever happens." "Witnesses didn't stop him before," Samuel pointed out. "No, but federal marshals might." Victoria Blackwell spoke up. "I've used my connections, my family's connections, to request immediate intervention. They'll arrive tomorrow evening." "That's too late," Jackson said. "The confrontation's set for noon." "Then we delay." Catherine said simply, "Make them wait, make them doubt, make them reveal themselves to all those witnesses." "How?" A strange smile crossed her face. "By giving them exactly what they want and nothing they expect." The plan she outlined was audacious, requiring perfect timing and iron nerve. But as Jackson listened, he felt hope kindling. It might work. It had to work. The morning passed in preparation. Sullivan proved invaluable, predicting Walter's moves and countering them. Marcus worked alongside men he'd threatened days before, earning suspicious looks but gradually proving his commitment. As noon approached, the town seemed to empty. Streets that should have bustled with activity lay silent. The journalists who'd flooded in found themselves the only visible presence, along with a few curious observers on rooftops. Walter Blackwell arrived at the cemetery with his hired guns, expecting to find Jackson waiting. Instead, he found only a single figure, Sophie Foster, sitting on her mother's grave, placing wildflowers. "Where's your father, girl?" Walter demanded. Sophie looked up with innocent eyes. "He said you wanted to talk here, so I came to introduce you to my mama." She turned to the headstone. "Mama, this is Mr. Blackwell. He's the one who wants to dig up your neighbors for gold." The simplicity of it was devastating. The journalists, hidden among the monuments, captured every word. Here was a child speaking truth to power, unafraid because she didn't fully understand the danger. "Get your father," Walter snarled. "Now." "But he's busy," Sophie replied. "The whole town's busy. We're having a celebration." "What celebration?" "For choosing love over fighting. Miss Catherine said it's harder, but better." Sophie stood, brushing dirt from her dress. "Would you like to come? There's pie." The absurdity of the invitation in the face of armed threat created a surreal moment. Some of the gunmen actually laughed, though they cut off quickly at Walter's glare. Then music drifted from the town fiddles and guitars, voices raised in song. The celebration Sophie mentioned was real, the entire town gathering in defiance of fear. "This is a trick," one of the Daltons muttered. "Of course it is." Jackson's voice came from behind them. He stood at the cemetery entrance, unarmed, hands visible. "The trick is showing you're not in control here. Blackwell, not anymore. I have 20 armed men, and I have a town that's chosen hope over fear." Jackson walked forward slowly. "Your men can shoot me, certainly. But then what gunned down celebrating families murder children at play in front of 50 journalists? The trap was elegant. Any violence now would be witnessed, recorded, condemned across the nation." Walter had come expecting a gunfight and found instead a moral battlefield where his weapons were useless. You think you're clever, Walter said. I think I'm tired. Jackson replied. Tired of violence, tired of fear, tired of men like you who see only power and profit. He stopped just out of reach. It ends today, Walter, not with blood, but with choice. And if I choose to have you shot where you stand, then you prove to everyone, including your son, exactly what you are. Marcus stepped from behind another monument, Victoria beside him. I already know what you are. Father, the question is whether you'll continue to be that. Walter's control finally cracked. You dare, you ungrateful whelp, I made you! Yes, Marcus agreed quietly. You made me into something monstrous, but Mother's helping me remake myself. It's not too late. Father, even for you. Weakness, Walter spat. Your mother always was weak. No! Victoria's voice was steel. I was strong enough to survive what you did to me, strong enough to return, strong enough to forgive. If you'll let me. The moment balanced on a knife's edge. Jackson saw the gunman's confusion. They'd been hired for a fight, not a family drama played out in a cemetery. Then Sullivan stepped into view. Walter's eyes widened in shock. Hello, Colonel, Sullivan said calmly. Surprised to see me above ground. William, but you're dead, in a way. Sullivan moved to stand with Jackson. The man who followed your orders without question, who did terrible things because you commanded it, he's gone. What's left is someone who's chosen a different path. Traitor! Yes, Sullivan agreed. I'm betraying the worst parts of myself, just as your son is, just as Captain Foster did when he chose to be more than your weapon. He looked at the hired guns. These men came for a fight. Are you going to give them one here, among the graves of the dead, in front of witnesses and your own family? Walter looked around wildly. His perfect trap had become his own cage. Every direction led to failure. Violence would destroy him in the press. Retreat would show weakness, and staying meant facing truths he'd spent decades avoiding. Choose, Walter, Jackson said softly. For once in your life, choose something other than power. The silence stretched eternal. Then, with a visible effort, Walter Blackwell holstered his weapon. Stand down, he told his men. All of you. The Daltons looked confused. But you hired us to... I said stand down, Walter's voice cracked. It's over. And just like that, it was. The great confrontation ended not with gunfire, but with an old man's recognition of defeat. The hired guns, robbed of purpose, began to drift away. The journalists scribbled frantically, already composing stories of the strange victory in Silver Creek Cemetery. Marcus approached his father cautiously. There's still time. The Federals will be here tomorrow. You could cooperate, make amends. Don't push your luck, boy. But there was less venom in it. Walter looked at Victoria. 20 years. Was I truly that terrible? Yes, she said simply. But 20 years is long enough for anger. I'm tired too. Walter, can't we all be tired of fighting? Jackson felt Catherine's presence before she spoke. She'd approached during the confrontation, ready to tend wounds that never came. Is it really over? She asked quietly. This part, Jackson replied. There'll be trials, investigations, probably years of legal battles, but the violence... He looked at the dispersing crowd, at families heading back to their celebration. Maybe that's finally done. Sophie ran to him, throwing her arms around his waist. You didn't shoot anybody. No, sweetheart, I didn't have to. Mama would be happy. Jackson lifted his daughter, holding her close. Around them, the cemetery returned to peace. The elaborate trap had become something else, a chance for redemption, for choosing differently. Not everyone would take that chance. Some of the hired guns would find other employment, other violence. Walter Blackwell would struggle with the loss of his empire, the shattering of his worldview. But Marcus walked with his mother, talking quietly of futures neither had imagined possible. Sullivan stood among the graves of former enemies, finally at peace with his choices. And Catherine's hand found Jackson's, a promise of tomorrows built on hope rather than fear. "Sheriff?" Theodore Roosevelt called out. "Folks are asking if you are coming to the celebration." Jackson looked at the people gathering, townspeople and former enemies, journalists and federal observers, all united by the strange alchemy of a confrontation that ended with words instead of bullets. "We'll be right there," he called back. As they walked toward town, Sophie between them, Catherine asked, "What happens now?" "Now," Jackson considered. "Now we learn to live without the shadow of violence. We build instead of destroy. We choose hope over fear. That's all." He smiled, the expression feeling strange but good on his face. "That's everything." Behind them, the cemetery stood peaceful in the afternoon sun. The graves remained undisturbed. The sacred ground protected not by force, but by the simple courage of people choosing to be better than their worst impulses. It wasn't a perfect ending. There would be consequences, complications, the slow work of rebuilding trust and community. But it was a beginning, and sometimes that's all anyone can ask for. As the music from the celebration grew louder, Jackson Foster Soldier, Sheriff, Father walked toward a future he'd never dared imagine, one where violence was last resort, not first instinct, where love could indeed conquer fear, where promises to the dead could be kept by choosing life. The autumn sun painted Silver Creek in shades of gold and copper as the town prepared for the harvest festival. 6 months had passed since the confrontation at the cemetery, and the changes were visible everywhere. Where once stood the charred ruins of the bank, a new building rose funded jointly by Andrew Carnegie and, surprisingly, Walter Blackwell as part of his court-ordered restitution. Jackson Foster stood on the steps of the newly completed courthouse, watching the preparations. The federal trial had concluded 2 weeks ago. Walter Blackwell, rather than face decades in prison, had negotiated a plea that stripped him of his railroad position but allowed him to retain enough wealth for a modest retirement. It was justice, if not complete satisfaction. Lost in thought again, Catherine's voice drew him back to the present. She wore a simple blue dress rather than her usual practical attire, her medical bag temporarily set aside for the celebration. "Just remembering," Jackson replied, taking her hand. The wedding band on her finger still felt new, though they'd married 3 months prior in a ceremony that saw former enemies standing as witnesses. Sophie burst from the courthouse doors, nearly colliding with them. "Papa, Miss Catherine, I mean. Mama Catherine, Uncle Marcus says the stage is arriving." The child had adapted to the family changes with the resilience of youth, embracing Catherine as the mother she barely remembered losing. Now she grabbed both their hands, pulling them toward Main Street where a crowd was gathering. The stage from Denver carried special passengers today. Marcus Blackwell had left after the trial to attend law school, determined to use his knowledge for justice rather than exploitation. His letters spoke of difficult studies and harder self-reflection, but also of hope. He stepped down from the stage, transformed. Gone was the arrogant young man who terrorized Silver Creek. In his place stood someone quieter, marked by his journey but not defeated by it. "Sheriff Foster," he said formally, then smiled. "Jackson, thank you for the letter of recommendation. It made a difference." "You made the difference," Jackson replied, shaking his hand. "The letter just told the truth." Victoria Blackwell followed her son, elegant as always, but warmer somehow. She'd remained in Silver Creek, using her inheritance to establish a school for girls that had already drawn students from 3 territories. "Catherine," Victoria embraced her. "How's the new clinic?" "Busy," Catherine laughed. "Between mining accidents and childhood scrapes, I barely have time to breathe." They made their way to the festival grounds, where the whole town had gathered. Tables groaned under the weight of harvest bounty. Musicians tuned their instruments. Children ran between the stalls, their laughter bright as bells. Sheriff Foster William Sullivan approached, though he went by William Stone, now a new name for a new life. He'd taken over the abandoned Blackwell mining operation, transforming it into a legitimate enterprise that shared profits with the town. The boys found something you should see. He produced a gold nugget the size of a hen's egg. Biggest yet. We're voting on what to do with it. Put it toward the town fund, Jackson suggested. The school could use new books. Already voted and done. Sullivan grinned. Great minds. Sheriff! As the afternoon wore on, Jackson found himself standing apart, watching the celebration with a mixture of joy and lingering disbelief. This peace, this prosperity, it had seemed impossible just months ago. Theodore Roosevelt, the prospector, raised a toast. To Silver Creek may she never forget what we learned here. What did we learn? Young Abraham Lincoln Johnson piped up. Florence Nightingale, who'd become the school's principal, knelt beside him. We learned that being strong doesn't mean being violent, that communities are more powerful than individuals, that people can change if given the chance. Even bad people, Sarah Roosevelt Williams asked. There are no bad people, Catherine interjected gently. Only people who make bad choices, and choices can always be made differently tomorrow. As evening approached, Jackson noticed a lone rider approaching from the east. His hand moved instinctively toward his gun before he caught himself. Old habits died hard, but they did die. The rider was a young man, travel-worn and nervous. Sheriff Foster, I have a letter for you. From Colonel Blackwell. A hush fell over the nearby crowd. Walter Blackwell had disappeared after the trial, his whereabouts unknown. Jackson took the letter, recognizing the precise handwriting. He read it silently, then aloud at Catherine's urging. Foster, I write this from San Francisco, where I've taken a position as a clerk in a shipping firm. Humbling work for a man of my former station, but honest. I wake each morning without the weight of schemes and calculations, and find it peaceful. I won't apologize. Words are insufficient for the harm I've caused, but I want you to know that I understand now what you tried to tell me. Power without purpose is emptiness. Wealth without community is poverty. Take care of my son. His mother has done what I couldn't, shown him how to be human. Perhaps there's hope for the Blackwell name yet. I won't return to Silver Creek. Some bridges are too thoroughly burned, but I wanted you to know that even an old fool can learn new lessons, given sufficient reason. W. Blackwell. The silence that followed was profound. Then Victoria spoke softly. He always did have to have the last word. But it's a good word, Marcus said. Better than I expected. As night fell, lanterns were lit, transforming the festival grounds into a fairyland of light and shadow. Dancing began, led by Samuel and Martha Chen, who'd celebrated their 20th anniversary by renewing their vows in the new church. Jackson found himself pulled onto the dance floor by Sophie and Catherine, the three of them laughing as they tried to coordinate steps meant for two. Papa's not very good at this, Sophie observed with devastating honesty. Dancing's like shooting, Catherine teased. It requires practice and a steady partner. Then I'd better get practicing, Jackson replied, spinning them both. Andrew Carnegie made a surprise speech, announcing that Silver Creek would become the headquarters for a new endeavor, a foundation dedicated to resolving conflicts without violence. What happened here should be a model, he declared, proof that even the bitterest enemies can find common ground. As midnight approached, the celebration began to wind down. Families gathered sleepy children. Musicians packed away instruments. The harvest moon rose full and bright, bathing everything in silver light. Jackson stood with his family on the hill overlooking the town. Silver Creek spread below them, peaceful and prosperous. The cemetery where so much had been decided lay quiet under the stars. Do you think Mama can see us? Sophie asked sleepily. I think she knows we kept our promises, Jackson replied, holding her close. All of them. The important ones, about choosing love over violence, about finding another way. Catherine leaned against his shoulder. "What are you thinking?" "That a year ago, I couldn't have imagined this. Any of it." He gestured at the peaceful town, their small family, the sense of belonging that had replaced years of isolation. "I was so certain that violence was the only truth that mattered. And now I know better. Violence is just fear wearing a mask of strength. Real courage is what everyone here showed the willingness to risk believing in something better." Sophie had fallen asleep in his arms, trusting and secure. As they walked home, Jackson reflected on the journey that had brought them here. From a sheriff haunted by his past to a man who'd found peace. From a town under siege to a community that had discovered its own strength. Not everything was perfect. Some scars remained. Some relationships would never fully heal. Walter Blackwell would likely never see Silver Creek again. Some of the hired guns had vanished into the frontier, carrying their violence elsewhere. But here, in this place, at this moment, something precious had been preserved and something new had grown. The gold beneath Miller's Creek still glittered, but it funded schools and medical care rather than greed. Former enemies worked side by side. Children played without fear. As Jackson tucked Sophie into bed, she stirred briefly. "Love you, Papa. Love you, Mama Catherine." "Love you too, sweetheart," they replied in unison. Later, standing on their porch under the vast western sky, Jackson and Catherine stood in comfortable silence. The badge on his vest caught the moonlight, but it no longer felt like a burden. It was simply part of who he'd chosen to be a protector, not a weapon. "No regrets?" Catherine asked. "None," Jackson replied without hesitation. "For the first time in my life, none at all." In the distance, a coyote called to its pack, wild and free. The sound no longer spoke of danger, but of the enduring spirit of the frontier, adaptable, resilient, always finding a way forward. Silver Creek slept peacefully under the stars, a testament to the power of transformation. Where once stood a town divided by greed and violence, now stood a community united by shared trials and common hope. The story that had begun with a sheriff's desperate attempt to control violence without becoming violent had ended with something far more powerful, the discovery that the strongest force in any community wasn't the fastest gun or the deepest pocket, but the simple choice to see enemies as potential allies, to meet hatred with understanding, and to believe that tomorrow could be better than yesterday. As Jackson and Catherine headed inside, hand in hand, the night wind whispered through the streets of Silver Creek, carrying with it the promise of all the peaceful tomorrows their courage had earned. The West was still wild, but in this one small corner of it, civilization had won not through conquest but through compassion, not through force but through the revolutionary act of choosing hope over fear. And in the end, that was the greatest victory of all. Thank you so much for listening to this story. I'd love to know where in the world you're enjoying this tale. Please share your location in the comments so we can connect and discuss your thoughts about the story. If you enjoyed this Wild West journey, please subscribe to Wild West Night. Hit that like button, and don't forget to press the hype button so more people can discover and enjoy these stories. Your support means everything and helps bring more tales of the Old West to life. Until next time, partners.